Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the August 26, 2024 El Dorado Irrigation District Board meeting. May I have a roll call, please?
Directors Osborne, Dwyer, Veerkamp, and Directors Osborne, Dwyer, Day, Veerkamp, and Enzini present. General Manager Abercrombie, General Counsel Polson, Clerk to the Board Sullivan present.
All right, thank you. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'm sorry, a smile came to my face because past Pledge Allegiance, former Director Bill George had a slightly different cadence that would sometimes throw the timing off. And I just thought of him, and I have good thoughts of him. So, do I have a motion to adopt today's agenda?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any public comment on the adoption of today's agenda? We'll get to each item individually, but do we have any public comment on the adoption?
If members of the public would like to address the board on the adoption of today's agenda, please refer to page 2 for detailed instructions. President Day, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the adoption of today's agenda. Moved by Director Osborne, seconded by Director Veerkamp. I believe we're ready for the vote.
All right, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. Jim, do we have any employee recognition this morning?
Yes, sir. Like to recognize, or we received a letter from Shannon Manwaring, Chief Financial Officer of Lake Oaks Mobile Home Community, expressing appreciation for outstanding assistance provided by Curtis McNeil, Josh Schultz, Justin Zylazowski, should be playing for the Green Bay Packers, Martin Garcia, and Zach Emily, all construction and maintenance workers in the drinking water division. Shannon praised their helpfulness, knowledge, and collaboration with their management and maintenance crew regarding the Lake Oaks Mobile Home Community. So again, just an example of great service to our customers.
Excellent. Always good to hear. All right. Is there any public comment today on items not on today's agenda relating to EID? Oh, yes, sorry.
I'd like to make a comment on this grant. I think it's
Oh,
wonderful.
wait,
that-
we will address that here under communication. So after public comment.
Thank
board
you. Okay.
So is there any public comment on items not on today's agenda related to EID?
If members of the public would like to address the board on today's open comment period, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. President Day, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak during public comment period.
All right, thank you. Jim,
Yes, we have a report by Emily Bertram. She'll be coming up and making a presentation regarding a grant award.
Good morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Emily Bertram. I'm the Parks and Recreation Manager for the district, and I happen to be in the enviable position of bringing good news on a Monday morning. Last fall, EID applied for a California Climate Investments Wildfire Prevention Grant. I think they probably could have added some more words in there, but maybe not. to purchase a skid steer masticator to assist us in continuing our efforts as an active participant in reducing hazard fuels within the Sly Park Recreation Area Vegetation Management Plan. This plan, which is the longest running of its kind in the state, also encompasses Sierra Pacific Industries property and other adjacent CAL FIRE managed lands, and is designed to protect the Pollock Pines community against the risk of catastrophic wildfire. With the support of the El Dorado County Fire Safe Council, the El Dorado and Georgetown Divide Resource Conservation Districts, and Sierra Pacific Industries, as well as the hard work by a number of departments within El Dorado Irrigation District, we submitted the grant proposal in January of this year and were recently notified that our application has been successful. While there are a few more steps to complete before the equipment is delivered, I am confident that we will see this equipment active in about a year as part of EID's efforts to protect our source water and our communities. Thank you.
Excellent, Emily. Thank you. Director Osborne?
I can't remember exactly the date. It has been 15 years ago. I instituted a fuels management prescribed fire burn in Sly Park. And we need to do it again. I'm glad we got a masticator to do it. But you wouldn't believe the people that complained about what we do. And I will guarantee you, based on my previous life, we saved Gold Ridge Forest because of that fuel, breaking up that fuel brick, that fuel loading, and it was massive inside of the park. Anyway.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions or comments for Emily?
You had the pictures up there, so.
Oh, we get to look at pictures?
Oh, by the way, you're out of uniform.
Yes, had to dust off my business clothes for the occasion.
Yeah, I just want to say congratulations on following through and getting the funding here. So actually, I believe it was Director Dwyer and myself went on a tour up there right in the middle of doing the initial mastication of the forest and cleaning it out. And it does show that, you know, the surrounding areas that we made the fire sturdy forest going on, it really, really showed evidence. I'm glad we've done this. So excellent job.
All right, thank you, Emily. Anything else, Jim? Okay, thank you. Directors, anything to report? Lori?
Yes, I just want to follow up with the general managers. Congratulations to our professional staff that goes to people's homes and provides the services they need whenever there's a major leak in their property. And I ran upon one particular ratepayer of ours who thanked me a lot about our staff and how willing the customer service was to refund some of the funding that she needed because she lost a great deal of water, did not realize it, but staff found it before they did. So good job.
Nothing from me, no.
Pat? George, do you have anything? No? All right. All right, we will move on to, I'm sorry, Jennifer, did you have anything?
Thank you, none today.
Okay. To approval of the consent calendar, do I hear a motion?
I'll move it.
I'll second it.
All right. We have a motion and a second. And is there any public comment on items on today's consent calendar?
If members of the public would like to address the board on the approval of today's consent calendar, please refer to page 2 for instructions. President Day, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on the approval of the consent calendar, moved by Director Dwyer and seconded by Director Anzini. I believe we're ready for the vote.
All right, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, just a quick housekeeping item. We'll do workshop item number 4, and then we'll take a break and go into We're going to split closed session B into two portions, and we'll do that between 4 and 5, and then we'll return and continue the meeting. And so number 4.
All right, good morning, President Day, members of the board. This is a informational workshop on our facility capacity charges update. Staff has been working with our consultant, Water Resources Economics, this year to go through a comprehensive update of the FCCs. Next slide. And you can see it's been a while since we've updated the FCCs. Back in 2013 was the last time the district went through we call it comprehensive update. There was a start at another update in 2016, and the board at that time elected not to go forward with that. And so we've just been escalating our capacity charges based on the engineering news record construction cost index every year since then. This is the agenda, and today we have Sanjay Gour. He's from Water Resources Economics, and you may remember him from some of the presentations of the cost of service study. So he's here to go through the majority of this, and I'll come in towards the end. So Sanjay.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, President, board members, staff. It's my pleasure to be here again to talk about the FCC. Today we have a lengthy presentation, so my apologies already, but there's a lot of information we want to cover, a lot of different types of FCC fees that we'll be looking at. We want to make sure it's very clear, understandable how we came about this. It's not arbitrary, capricious. There is math behind these numbers. So I'm going to do a little introduction about who I am, just in case for the public's sake, not for your sake. Then go over the scope of service that we did, go over the schedule, review the current fees, the proposed fees, have questions, discussions. Of course, anytime in my presentation, I don't need to say this, but please do interrupt me. So if there's any questions, concerns, I definitely want to hear it, and we can address it right then. So who I am, I do this for a living. I've done this for 25 years, focusing on water and wastewater service, how you do fees, how you do rate studies. I've assisted over 100 different agencies in California specifically. I'm a member of the American Water Works Association's Rates and Charges Committee, which sets the standards of how you do this. I actually help write the manuals associated with that. There's a new manual coming out. I've co-authored a couple of the chapters. I have 2 master's degrees, one from a banana slug, UC Santa Cruz, and another crimson color at Harvard. So what are we talking about today? Today we're talking about an FCC study and a facility capacity fee, which is a one-time fee for development to join the system. There's infrastructure that's already in place or needs to be developed, and this is that one-time fee to pay for that. So there's equity between the current users and future users. One of the challenges with these kinds of studies is the terminology. A lot of people use different languages in different communities. In this community here, we call it facility capacity fees. Other people call it connection fees, capacity fees, system development charges. There's a whole array of discussion, but it's all the same thing. It's just this one-time fee for development. And the key thing here is that we want to address equity so that the current users are not subsidizing future users. We also want to have a proportionality. So there's a proportionality, and we usually achieve that by the meter size. And there needs to be a burden of proof of what is the benefit associated with these new development with the fee. So growth pays for growth, as the mantra is. So today's goal is to show you the current fees for our proposal, the methodology to explain to you that it is sound, it's compliant with legal requirements, it's fair between new development and existing users, and of course, to receive your input and guidance. So our schedule is pretty comprehensive. As you can see, there's 8 folds here where we've first looked at the fees, we talked about methodologies, we talked about framework, we talked about issues and concerns of the prior study, current study. We develop an understanding of your system. How does it operate? What's the different costs associated with it? We start developing a framework. We actually develop a model, non-proprietary. You have a copy of it in Excel. We hold stakeholders with the BIA, of course, with staff and with the BIA. We are right now in the midst of writing the report. We're planning to provide that to you in the next week or so, and then have a public hearing. And this is the schedule of where we are. We had the stakeholder with the BIA on July 9th. Today is the public workshop. As I mentioned, we're working on the report, planning to get that to you end of the month or beginning of September. And we're tentatively shooting for September 23rd for the public hearing, based on your input. So how do we calculate a capacity fee study? What are the different approaches? There are 3 different approaches. The first is what we call a buy-in approach, where we look at the facilities already in place. That assumes that there is capacity for development to occur. It addresses the question about value, time value of money. So a lot of these assets are old. They're built a long time ago. How do we value them today? They also might be depreciated a little bit, not as new, so we need to take that into account. The second one's incremental. That's a little bit easier to understand. That's basically you need to build a new treatment plant. You need to upsize a certain pipeline. You need to do something for development to occur. And the third one is a hybrid where you add those 2 together. The metaphor I like to use is the buy-in is sort of a club. They already have, you're joining a membership of a gym. Incremental is now they maybe have to build a new pool or for the new members to show up. And then the hybrid is the combination of those 2. So the last fee was done some time ago in 2013. It has been, indexed by ENR, which is great that you've done that. Something I continue to recommend you to do. And now we're asking ourselves, what's the current methodology? What makes sense? And we are using all 3 approaches here with the buy-in, incremental, and hybrid. And so these are all the fees that we're looking at. This is a very comprehensive list. So we're looking at potable water. We're looking at wastewater. We're looking at recycled. We're looking at ag metered irrigation. And then we're looking at dual plumbing. And then we're also looking at private fire service. So this is a comprehensive list, as I mentioned. Usually most communities, it's either 1 or 2, not necessarily 6. So it is. So that's why the length of this presentation. And we want to take our time and really understand the different components. So this is your water fee. Your water fee both has a buy-in component, new source of supply, future capacity, gabbro soils, and the line cover 3 fees, and you add those components together. It is based on meter size. It is also based on equivalent dwelling units, which is the hydrological capacity of a meter size. So that EDU takes into account the meter size. One thing I do want to note is also takes into account the number of dwelling units. So it's not, so if a multifamily complex comes into play, it has 10 dwelling units, it would be charged based on the 10 dwelling units, not on the meter size. And I'm bringing that up because that's something that we're recommending to change. Wastewater, similar, again, based on meter size. So with water, it's very clear, we know the capacity, we know how much water to use. Wastewater, we don't have a wastewater meter. As you know, we have only a water meter. So that's why we're using a water meter as a means to determine the wastewater generation. We're using the EDU's equivalency. We have a buy-in for treatment. We have future capital costs, and we add those together to get the wastewater treatment. And the same thing with the wastewater, we also do the meter size, the multifamily based on number of dwelling units. And that's, again, something that we'll be recommending to change. Thank you. Sorry about that. Recycle, similar methodology in the sense that we're doing it based on meter size. We're taking into account the EDUs or instantaneous capacity, the gallons per minute. We have the fixed assets plus future capital in here, and that's the cost associated with it. We also have ag meter customers. Those individuals took into account what they use of the system, taking out the treatment in the prior study. We have the gabbro, we have the line cover, and we have the total cost. This hasn't been updated in a very long time. That's a discussion point that I'll bring up, and that's why the fees that we're talking about is a bit more than it currently is, because it hasn't been updated in several decades. Then we also have dual plumbed, potable, and recycled. And this component, what we want to take into account is how much of the treated water they use and how much of the recycled water they use for outdoor. So there's different components in here. We take into account the indoor needs, the factors associated within the prior study, and we add them all up together to get the total fee. Similar methodology that we're proposing in the proposed one. And then we have private fire service. So private fire service is the fire sprinklers in commercial residence. As you notice, it's only charged for 8-inch and above in your current methodology. The lower meter flows are not charged anything. So what are the things that we took into account when we looked at this fee? Well, the first thing is that we excluded distribution lines. Those are in-kind contribution that developers put in place. So any water line that's 6 inches or below are excluded in the analysis. For wastewater, we excluded all collection fees, and recycling also 6 inches and below.
Those are lines that are within the development most often, right?
Yes, in the development of service area.
Yeah, for our system, most of those 6-inch lines, they don't provide a benefit to anybody connecting. It's usually on a street, dead-end street type of thing. So we tried to exclude those. And that was an issue back in 2013 as far as what size to remove, and that's what we settled on back in 2013, and we just kept that going for this one.
Thank you.
When calculating a fee, we have to take into account the time value of money, as I mentioned. We look at current reserves, we look at asset value. So all of these are in 2024 dollars that I'll be presenting. We don't know the inflation at end of this year, but by then, in 2025, if the board does consider this may be something to consider, is to increase the fees by that percentage of inflation that occurred this year toward 2025. All the assets are valued based on replacement cost less depreciation. There are different methodologies of valuation. We believe that replacement cost less depreciation is the best way to do this. And the reason why is twofold. One, at first it takes into account the time value of money. Some of these assets are very old, right? And as we all know, what we can build in the 80s and 90s is not what we can pay today, right? And so there's that, and even the last few years. So we want to take that into account. We also want to take into account assets that are depreciated. If they're old, if they've been depreciated, if they're off the books, we want to take that into account. So replacement cost less depreciation takes both those factors into play. All right, yes.
Yes, Sanjay. How do we get to the replacement cost? I know it's pretty easy to take a book value of an asset, the initial cost minus the depreciation. But some of these assets are, to determine what the current value really is or replacement cost really is, would be very, very difficult. So how did you attack that?
So we use the ENR index, and we look at what the inflationary that occurred, let's say, in assets from 1980, and we look for the next 45 years, what's the inflation that occurred during that time period, or for 44 years. So it isn't you're right in the sense that we didn't go and how much does it cost to buy that land? And we know, there's a lot more permitting, we know that it's most likely we're a little bit under the real cost, yeah. Correct. Yeah, and there are different indexes out there. There's some exotic ones called the Hanme-Whitman index. That's more what you use, which is concrete and steel, but it's not less known, and more people are comfortable with the ENR. That's more what we use as an industry. Yeah, thank you so much. So we're going to talk about potable water, and then after I go through the potable water section, I'll take a little break, pause, because there's a lot here, and then we'll do the next one. So potable water, the first thing we want to do is the buy-in approach, and we ask ourselves, what are all the assets? So we take into account all your assets. We put them in today's dollars, less depreciation. We also exclude those pipelines that I mentioned, the 6 inches and below. So that's $542 million. As mentioned, most likely that is slightly biased lower, so we acknowledge that. We also take into account the current number of EDUs, equivalent dwelling units, and this is sort of like an equity. This is how much everyone sort of paid into the system. So you can almost say every customer has paid roughly $11,000 to maintain the system in the sense of through rates over time. Then we also take into account cash reserves. The reason why we take into account cash reserves is that money can be put into assets right away. So even though it's in the bank, it could be bought and you could build a treatment plant or whatever. So we want to take that into account. We also want to subtract out debt. The reason why we subtract out debt is that debt is something that's obligation that ratepayers will have to pay. So when these individuals join the system, they'll be also paying that debt service. So you subtract that out, so that's the liability there. And so we add up all these numbers, we divide them, and so the buy-in to the system is $5,635. And in some sense, that's what each customer, the first customer that showed up in El Dorado service area, that's what they've been paying over this lifetime in the sense of the time value.
I have a question. So I just want to clarify and simplify my question, maybe others would understand that. So we have a group, undeveloped area or unincorporated area of homes that have been there for a long time, and they want to hook up to our system. The cost for each one of them would be $5,635. Is that what the cost is?
Can you repeat the question? I just want to make sure I
Okay.
understood it.
So a group of homes, this includes in an unincorporated area that have been there for many years, want to hook up to the system. So the cost to each individual property owner is going to be $5,635?
If, without any new assets, and then the other thing that we do have to take into account is property tax, right? Because those
Right.
people didn't pay any property tax, and that property tax also helped out.
You mean the EID property?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
the
that
portion.
portion, yeah.
Okay, thank
So
you.
those are three things that we would want to factor into. One
Right.
is, they're outside the service boundary, you want to annex them, most likely, that's what we're talking about.
Correct.
And then, so there's a couple of components. One is this, one is the property tax. The other thing that we may want to consider, if it's a large development that's annexed in your service area, is water availability and just sort of.
That's going to be another piece, but that was
Yeah,
the question
correct.
I wanted to
Yeah,
ask about the
'cause-
FCC.
Yeah, because this one
Okay.
assumes that we have the water available for this new development. We're not, it's not a huge increase in this potential scenario. I don't know where we're talking about, how many people.
It's just it's a scenario.
Yeah, if it's only like 100 houses, then it's different. If it's,
Right.
10,000 houses,
Yeah,
then
no,
it might be
that's, my question is unincorporated area's been there for a while.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then also if they join, then the other nuance is the property tax. Will they be paying in the future or not? And that needs to be addressed.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, please, thank you. So the next component is the incremental, and this is where we work diligently with, and I really appreciate Brian and Mike's, their thorough analysis. They did make me have some gray hair sometimes in the sense, but they really wanted to make sure we got this right. So I really appreciate their due diligence in that. And that we looked at all of these different assets and we asked ourselves, how much of these assets are for future development? How much of them are for current development? And they really took the time to determine that. We also took quite a bit of time looking at the value, the customers that we serve, and so that it's really fair and equitable. And we really addressed that concern, so I really appreciate them doing that. So these are all the different projects. If you have questions, I know Brian will love to talk about them. So but I'm going to go on to the next slide unless there's a question there. And the next slide just shows you the math that we did to determine the future EDUs. The EDUs take into account both the capacity of the system, the peaking of customers, and based on that, we can determine the EDUs. And these numbers on slide 22 tie with slide 21. And again, if you're interested, we can talk about that. But I just want to make sure you understand that we did do our due diligence in showing the detail, and this isn't just something we just grabbed. We actually looked at each CIP project and asked ourselves how much growth could be served.
And these are things that are anticipated to occur in the next 10 years.
Yes.
Not necessarily 15 or 20 years.
Correct.
Because theoretically, we'll update the FCCs again. Okay.
Then based on that information, the next slide, thank you, basically is a summary of all that information. We also take into account financing costs because some of these projects are large, and we're anticipating that we will need to issue debt for these projects. There's interest that needs to be bared, and the question is who should bear for that? We believe that developers should pay for that, the interest costs of borrowing these projects, and so that takes this into account too. And then based on these informations, the next slide is the summary where we get the buy-in, we get the incremental. We still, the gabbro soil is a abatement charge that still needs to be in play. We're just doing that. The current line cover, there's still debt service associated with that. That needs to be taken into account. And we have the new updated fee which is $33,809. We have the current fee at $25,178. So the difference is $8,631. Do note that this fee that I'm calculating is based on 2024 dollars, so it would need to be updated in 2025.
Back to Director Anzini's question or the scenario of homes that are not currently hooked up to our system but want to be, it would be 33,000 per dwelling unit. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be with, there's some nuances in detail. I don't want to like,
That's all right.
yeah, I mean, like I said, a couple of nuances is the property tax that needs to be addressed. And then how much, is these like little infill pockets or are these something bigger?
Thank you.
And then this is just the buy-in, yeah, and this is the whole thing, excuse me. The next slide now is that methodology change that I mentioned about multifamily. Currently, you do take into account number of dwelling units. What we're recommending is, and it's 75% of the dwelling units, so a 10-unit complex would pay 7.5 of a dwelling unit. Our recommendation is to do it based on meter size. So we really don't, you're a 2-inch meter, you're a 2-inch meter. And that's a capacity that you're buying into. And so you should just pay for that. This actually will lower the fee for multifamily complexes. And it also, so first to me, it's equitable, it's much more precise, and I would recommend this. But it also has some side benefits from a policy perspective that you may care about. One of them specifically is affordability. As we all know, affordability is a challenge in our community, in California, and everywhere. And this helps by lowering the cost for multifamily development.
How did you arrive at the 75%?
That was the prior study, so I didn't derive that, but I think they took into account the household size, I suspect. The thought process is that there's 4 people in a single family, 3 people in multifamily, so you get 75.
I think it was a ballpark. I like the proposed new method. It's more accurate, and like you said, more equitable. I mean, the meter, if it's 2-inch meter, that they have a certain amount of capacity of water that could come through that, and we base it off that.
Yeah. So that's the water. I'm going to pause for a second just to see if there's any question here before I go to the next subject, which is wastewater.
I was going to hold the question off until the end, but based on, I'm not going to hold you to it exactly, but what has inflation done since 2013 to 2024? We know from our contractors that materials have skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why we had to increase our bond rating. To protect our bond rating, we had to increase our rates by 13% this time, 12. But can you just guesstimate what inflation has done since 2013?
I mean, that's a hard question, and there's, so I would say it ranged depending on the product type, right? Because, so for instance, there's labor, there's wood,
Yeah.
and there's concrete and steel.
Exactly.
And
I mean, I'm not
concrete
going to
steel
hold
is
you
like-
to it. I've
it's
just,
like, yeah.
wanted your scientific wild-ass guess. What?
I would, the minimum is 80%. The most, well, not actually the most, but some of them are around 3 times more.
Okay.
I don't know if you agree. I mean,
Oh, I have no basis to disagree with you.
okay. Yeah, okay. No, please, go ahead.
Just to add to it, just how it pertains to the FCC, the incremental component, the costs for the future projects, that has dramatically gone up from previous studies because of inflation. Just the cost of our projects we know are tremendous nowadays. But to offset that, the buying component of the water FCC is actually a little bit lower, and I think that reflects just an aging system. The value of our existing system is a little bit less. So it's kind of 2 different things acting together.
Okay.
So if we're done with water, I'm going to go to wastewater next. Okay.
Actually, I have a kind of a question, Brian, might also pertain to you. So I know we look at these, the costs, okay, we're going to build these things, it's for future development over the next 10 years, so we're going to divvy that up and assign that as the cost of the FCCs. But, and we're not counting things that might happen 20 years or 30 years from now. Is that a risk? Because to use as an example, in Florida, like with their condos, and that their HOAs have undercollected tremendously what they need in order to properly maintain their infrastructure, their foundations, all that stuff. They're, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars of stuff that they probably should have been collecting for all along. They haven't. Now people are getting slammed with these huge $50,000, $100,000 assessments. Should we be considering collecting over a longer period of time for things that we know are going to happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something that we talked about at the beginning of the study, kind of what time period we looked at. And back in 2013, we looked at that longer period of time. And if you remember, we included the whole White Rock infrastructure project, which was, going to be farther out there. But I think we arrived at more of a 10-year time frame. That's probably more common. And Sanjay, if you want to chime in as well, I think it's reasonable to look at a 10-year and then make sure we do updates, more frequently than, 10 years, 3 or 5 year updates, just to make sure we're staying on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I think it's twofold. One is, it's that balancing act. It's 5 years, 10 years, 25 years. What information do we know? What do we think is pertinent? Longer you go out, less information there is, and accuracy in a sense, but then the fee may be more smoother in some sense, but it may be more volatile because we may be really off. We think 10 years is the right balance. The other challenge in that case is I do think there's an issue with I believe in free market. I do believe in capitalism, but sometimes when you have private people in entities, they think short term, and they can sell themselves and then shift the liability to someone else, and I think that's what you're seeing in Florida.
All right, thank you. Yeah, Brian?
Director Day, President Day, excuse me, if I may. I think the other thing that the board should bear in mind is that in order to meet the legal standard associated with the capacity charge, the district can't recover more than its reasonable costs. And those costs must bear a proportional benefit to the property that will be served. So there's a fine line here. Of course, the district needs to recover its costs, but it can't recover more than its costs. And so defining a time period and probably a shorter one is likely more defensible for the district in terms of making sure that those costs are in fact meeting the legal standard of reasonableness.
Going forward, how often would we want to review this?
I defer to Sanjay on his recommendation, but at least every 10 years, if not more frequently, because things change, especially when you have a major asset coming on board on the incremental side. I think that's something we'd really want to consider, that like the treatment plants.
Right.
If we have a $100 million treatment plant coming in, probably do it every 5 years, but if we don't have something changing, every 10 is probably good. But Sanjay?
Yeah, I
your
agree
thoughts?
with you, exactly. If it's you don't have a major capital project coming on play, then 10 years is reasonable. Some people do it with their rate study, so that might be also a check-in, because when you do your financial plan, you just want to make sure that both fees are sustainable financially and one isn't leaning on the other from a risk perspective.
Right. Well, I know this past 10 years, we've indexed for inflation, which has helped. And I hope the board will continue that. But I would say we ought to, maybe not a full-blown study, but certainly every 5 years ought to pull it out and go over it and say, whoops, hey, we've got these huge assets like the water treatment plants that suddenly are really, really costly, that are coming down faster than we thought they were, or they're going to cost a lot more than we thought they were. And then if we need to do another study, we can, but rather than wait 10 years.
We'll put it in our planning mix.
Thank you.
So now let's talk about wastewater. So wastewater, same sort of framework in the sense that we look at the buy-in component. We ask ourselves, what's the value of the system? We do exclude collection systems. $300 and almost $9 million is the value of the system. We take into account reserves. As I mentioned, that reserves could turn into capital projects. We subtract out debt service. That debt service is a future obligation that ratepayers will pay. We take into account the number of dwelling units there are, buy-in components, then $7,765. Some of these, from the prior studies, some of these numbers have changed a little bit. One of the components that has changed is sort of the value of the system. It's less now. Things are getting older, so that's just something you'll see when I show you the proposed fee. Again, we went through a very lengthy detailed analysis and asking ourselves what assets over the next 10 years will be beneficial for development. These are all the different assets that we took into account. We took into account the number of EDUs that will be occurring. The growth rate that we did take into account is consistent with the county traffic impact fee studies, and it's actually slightly lower than that. So we don't anticipate as much growth. One of the challenges with any of these studies is growth and developers, and there is a concept called carrying cost of capital, which is basically you build the system, you hope development shows up, and then they don't show up, and then you have to carry that capital cost, right? So it's like a bank almost, like you're building something, you're hoping they show up, and they can show up whenever they want, and so that's some of the challenges that we have to take into account. So we look at the incremental, all those different components, as I mentioned. This is the fee. As I mentioned, we take into account the growth rate. We're actually using 95% of what's being assumed based on the county. And then based on those informations, we can add things together. We can get the buy-in, we can get the incremental. The proposed fee is $13,794. That is lower than the current. So please do note, sometimes I do propose lower fees, they do happen. So the current is $17,934. And the things that happen is the asset value is lower, and there's not as much, we don't anticipate on the wastewater side so much capital projects for the future. So that's why the fees dropped. But when we combine the two together, because when development occurs, they will buy both of those components. So they will see an increase on the water side, a decrease on the wastewater. So overall, it's a $4,491 increase that they will see. So that was the water and wastewater. I'm going to pause for a second just to see if there's any comments before I go to recycling. Okay. Well, let's go to recycling. So recycling, again, similar methodology. We look at the buy-in component. We look at reserves. There isn't debt. We exclude out the distribution and transmission. So it's $3,115. There isn't incremental. We're not at the next slide, please. Sorry about that. There isn't any incremental. We're not anticipating to develop more or further expand the recycling system. So this actually drops from the proposed $3,115, which excludes the inflation that occurred this year, to the current $4,246. So it's a $1,131 reduction. So I'll go now to agriculture meter irrigation. As I mentioned in my prior discussion, this fee hasn't been updated in a long time. And because of that, since hasn't been evaluated over 15 years, the fee has been very relative to the potable. At one time, they were relatively close. Now you can see the gap is very big. And because of that, there are some changes that will be occurring. So as I mentioned, the fee hasn't been evaluated over 15 years. We take into account both the assets that the ag customers do not benefit, such as the treatment costs and other factors. And also, we want to be consistent with other studies that have been done. You just did a rate study recently. There's a methodology that was developed excluding how much of the potable customer benefit from recycled, so we want to take that into account, and that's 41.2%. So we take all these different components into account. We also exclude capital projects, future capital projects that don't benefit AMI, the ag customers, such as treatment plant. So this one's a little bit more lengthy in the analysis because of all, next slide please, because of all the different factors that we take into account. We take into account the buy-in, but the buy-in of the potable customer, we only use 41% of that, consistent with the rate study. We look at the incremental. We ask ourselves which components they should pay for, which one they don't. As you know, there's some zeros there, quite a bit of zeros. They're only paying for one thing there. We also look at the supplemental charge that they should pay. And so that basically what we're saying is that the ag customers' new development for ag, I should say, is $10,416. And when we look at that with the current, as I mentioned, the current hasn't been updated in some time. It's $1,123. We see the increase there. Now, I just want to make sure we're all clear here. Sometimes people get a little bit sensitive. We're talking about new development for ag. This is not current ag customers. This is anyone who joins the system who wants to develop. I suspect this is pretty rare incidents, but it could occur in your service area.
But that estimate is based on a 3/4 inch meter, where in reality, ag would probably be using more like 2-inch
Correct.
meters?
And I'm going to have a next slide. I can show you exactly
you.
that. Yeah, great question. So the next, so you're right on the nail in that. Well, you know, most people you have a 2. What does it mean? So we want to take into account both what they use for the potable. So that's they should pay that part, the 3/4 inch, and then they should pay the incremental increase. So currently they would pay $28,370. Under the proposed 2-inch, they would pay $78,947. And that's that increase with the ag meter.
And just for the board's information, Brian reached out to the ag community and had those workshops with them as well.
So that's ag. Now yeah, go ahead, please.
Just a point, ag does not need potable water. And we used to use ditch water, but the ditches were so expensive to maintain that we went to pipe water. And people say, well, how come ag is getting a discount based on residential? They don't need potable water to irrigate their crops. So anyway, and the ditches were just horribly expensive to maintain. So the potable water discount is applicable.
And then this one, you can see that they'd be paying the residential fee because this is an AMI service with a residence. And then the other part of that would be the ag component, very similar to our rates. They pay the first 2 tiers of potable water rates, third tier it's an ag rate. So very similar in design.
So now we're going to talk about dual plumbed, potable, and recycled. So this is a scenario, next slide please, is where someone has a dual plumb system where they have water, potable water for indoor needs, recycled for outdoor. So we want to take that into account. How much is indoor, how much is outdoor? Dual plumb demand is considerably less than potable because it is for outdoor water use. We did do some analysis looking at consumption data from 2019 to 2023. Basically, they use 60% of the potable water, and it should be taken into account for potable and 100% for recycled. So based on that information, we look at all the different components of the potable system. They're paying basically 59.7% of that. They pay for the recycling system 100%. So then the fee is $23,288. The next slide shows us the comparison between those two. So this fee will go up by $2,381. So again, a logic methodology, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just noticing the percentage, pretty similar increase.
Yeah.
And just to note that the recycled water system, we know we have the supply and demand imbalance. I don't think there's going to be hardly any new dual plumbed connections anymore. There may be some onesie, twosie infills, but just not a big impact or expansion of the recycled water system going forward.
We're almost done. The last one is the private fire FCC, and this one will actually be pretty quick. So you currently charge this for 8 inches or larger. We did do a survey looking at neighboring communities and asking if they also charge this, and none of them do. And because of that, we recommend just discontinuing this charge and not having this fee for private fires.
So this includes fire hydrants? Say if a neighborhood does not have a fire hydrant, maybe 10 homes out in, I would say, Shingle Springs, and they don't have a fire hydrant near them. I think this is a question that came up a couple of years ago for one of the ratepayers in my area. Not sure, I think maybe it was somewhere else, but they needed to put a fire hydrant in for those homes because there was nothing there. Is that what this is?
No, this is more applies to a new
To
commercial
commercial.
development. You've probably
Okay.
seen in the front of commercial,
right.
it's kind of like a riser set of pipes that
So-
have a backflow device as well. So that's what it's for. It's for a private fire service to feed their sprinklers.
Maybe an
Oh,
industrial,
warrants.
industrial?
Industrial, commercial,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Only used in case of a fire and emergency. So that goes through the reasons why
Okay.
we're not.
Is it typically a separate
Charge.
meter than what, say, the building would
Yeah,
have?
it's got a separate meter to
Okay.
it. Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm just trying to get clear on why not have a hookup fee if, aren't there, or is it just the lack that it hardly ever gets used? Is that the theory?
I think that's our recommendation is not to charge it. It's just for an emergency type of situation. We would track the water use in the event it does happen, just for whatever purpose that would be. But, I guess there is a justification to charge because, if that does occur, your system has to have the capacity to provide that water. But we just think with the complications of trying to figure out the different sizes and what that charge is based on, we recommend just not doing that. No other agency that we could find even does a charge like that.
Okay, thank you.
I just thought it'd be important from an operational standpoint to perhaps highlight the question that Director Enzini brought up and President, President Day, excuse me. You can tell it's a Monday morning. So similar to any other hydrant that's used at the district, when there is a fire in a commercial structure, they will connect to a hydrant. Probably not the most qualified person, now that I think about it, to describe. So similar to any other hydrant use, that's a general district-wide customer benefit that's not disproportionate in terms of the capacity that's provided. So this is simply, as Brian described, a fire department connection. You see the piping come up. It's private infrastructure that connects to our district hydrant to help suppress the fire. Similar to any other fire at a home, you connect to the hydrant. So there's a district-wide benefit from that existing capacity. It's not a separate capacity just for that individual structure. They're connecting to the main district system in order to suppress the fire. So just in terms of how that would actually work in the unfortunate event there was a fire. So, I'm sorry.
In the past, we had a director that wanted to charge for fire hydrant. How do you meter it?
And I was also reminded, I apologize, Dan Corcoran, Operations Director. So thank you.
So that's my part of the presentation. The next part, I'm going to have Brian talk about.
Yeah, thanks. So Sanjay mentioned in July, we arranged a meeting with the local Builders Industry Association representative and any the local developers that wanted to come, and we gave them the preliminary data that is very similar to this. So we did that in July. We asked them to provide us any comments, so they sent us a letter, I believe in late July. So the next few slides just kind of go over their comments and what our approach to those would be. So regarding the comment letter, they really had 3 points. The first point would be that FCC should be based on square footage. They wanted us to look at, based on the FCC on square footage versus water meter size. The second would be, we've had an ongoing request from Lennar, specifically on having a reduced FCCs for age-restricted housing. I gave some of that detail in the agenda packet. And then the third point was that to try to reduce some of the upfront costs to developers by capping the fees, and then have like a remaining balance be paid once the building permit is issued for each different lot. So going through some of those. Next slide, please.
Okay, he's gonna do this.
First on the square footage, understand from Sanjay, there are some agencies, it was probably more common in the past to base these capacity charges on square footage, but there are different challenges with that. Primarily, the building footprint, we don't believe is, a direct relationship to the amount of water use. Specifically on the indoor, you could have a pretty small building footprint with a large water use if the family has a lot of kids and showers and that type of thing versus, maybe a larger house, but only, less people in it. Also, it doesn't take into account the outdoor irrigation part of that. And then we've also we know that some other agencies like Placer County base their connecting charges on lot size. We're not recommending lot size as well. It's kind of similar to square footage that you could have a large lot with just natural landscape, no yards or anything like that with pretty low water use compared with a smaller lot, fully landscaped front and backyard with lawns. So there's just too many unknowns and variables to try to base our capacity charges on indoor use versus outdoor use, lot size, building square footage, that type of thing. So we, again, as Sanjay reiterated, our FCCs, we believe should be more based on the capacity and the meter size, rather than trying to pick, the demands for each type of lot or different types of use. The second comment is on the age-restricted FCC reduction. We've got that request. We've evaluated that in the past, and we took a look at that again. And again, the underlying principle with meter size, just like customers, like meters, should be charged the same amount. 3/4 inch should be charged a 3/4 inch. 2 inch should be charged a 2 inch, no matter what's behind that meter. We didn't, on the potable water side, we didn't find any other agencies that do this. On the water side, again, the same type of concerns there, and I think that's the reason. It's just there's too many variables, indoor versus outdoor use for age restricted. I know my parents, they live in one of the Lennar communities down there. They've got one of the small lots with just bark and a couple drip irrigations, so their use is small. But then one of the first age-restricted communities, the Four Seasons, although it's dual plumbed, it's pretty lush landscaping front and back. So, there's two different examples of age-restricted in our own service area that I'm sure have different uses. So we're not recommending anything on the potable water side as far as an age-restricted reduction. On the wastewater side, it's a little bit different story. There are examples, and there's more of a nexus on the wastewater side because with less residents in a home, there's going to be less wastewater flow. There's 3 examples here of agencies that have implemented a reduced wastewater capacity charge. Sacramento Area Sewer District reduces theirs by about 40%. We also found the City of Lincoln and Placer County also have some reductions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
With the wastewater part of this, Sacramento, City of Lincoln, Placer County, with that reduction, does that include all houses with age that are at that age? I mean, not just, is it just developer areas?
Just in the community.
It's the community.
Just in the design
Okay.
community.
Yeah,
All
it'd
right.
be any new.
So they
age-restricted
didn't
community.
grandfather in older communities that have been there?
No, because those, any older
I'm
community would
just-
be just paying rates.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we're just talking about anything.
This is
new.
the deal you cut with the developer, right?
Though it's-
Well, the developer is the one who requests this, do they not?
Well, it's a deed restricted,
Yes.
be like a
Thank
deed
you.
restricted, approved by the county.
Yeah, it's more of a county.
So blame
approval
the
process
county.
than- yeah.
Otherwise, we'll all be getting it now, we're all getting up there.
Well, blame
It ain't gonna happen, yeah.
Okay, so
We'll
next
take that
slide
one.
is just going to some of our considerations on the age restricted. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we've been thinking about is just with the state indoor conservation requirements, we know that's going down from 55 gallons per day down to 42, or who knows where eventually it will be. We may not see a huge difference, now and in the future between age restricted, non-age restricted homes. We know operations staff, they're already noting that at our wastewater treatment plants, they've already seen a lot of reduction in the inflows to our wastewater plants because of just reduced indoor use. The other point, there's really no guarantee from our perspective that an age-restricted development will remain that way in the long term. So that's another consideration. But ultimately, there is nexus studies to justify something. Other agencies have done this, so it's something that staff would be open to looking at if the board wanted us to give us direction to look at. But we're not recommending at this point in time. We think that the wastewater FCC that we have proposed is the best way. But again, we're open to any input or direction.
Yeah, I mean, I would concur probably with staff's recommendation. First of all, I think just charging by meter size creates a great deal of predictability and consistency, which I think is really good. Then also, I don't know that we necessarily, if you reduce the FCC for these age-restricted communities, then those other costs then have to be borne by other people not in those communities. And in fact, I don't know that we necessarily, as a policy, want to encourage more, no offense to anybody, but as Brian pointed out, we're all getting older, and our community, our county, I know, just me, but our county's getting older. And I think we want to encourage diversity in our population and not just double down on more mature people. So.
To back up. Thank you. To back up and kind of take a high-level view of this whole situation or challenge, is we have significant fixed costs in our plant and capacity. And the challenge is, how do we translate those fixed costs into charges for new development? And so I think it's to be as fair as we can be, and of course, everybody has a different opinion of fair. Like people that are in a road association, if they live at the beginning of the road, they say, why should we have to pay for this whole road when we only drive on this little part? That's kind of what we're facing here. And I think we have a philosophy of all in. If you're gonna be part of our system, then you need to buy in and take it off the backs of the existing customers, at least a portion of it. So I'm really not in favor of doing any more fractionalization of our fees. Thanks.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I recall back when we updated in 2013, we did get a request from, hey, what about, we think of the development as the big El Dorado Hills folks, but what about the small home builders that want to build a new home, a new property up in Pollock Pines? And I remember we had a request for that we denied having any type of reduction for that. It's, an infill type of lot in Pollock Pines, low water use, but we ultimately decided, no, it should just be, one district fee for the overall system. And then the third comment from the BIA is addressing the timing of FCC payments. So just a little bit of background on how we work with the county on collecting FCCs and then letting the county know about that. So the county really is the one that requires the developer to purchase meters prior to them approving the final map and give them the go-ahead to start building. So the purpose of that avoids dry lots, any lots in the county that doesn't have a meter associated with it. So once the developer purchases the FCCs from the district, we issue what we call a meter award letter that the county gets, and that gives us the coordination and the proof to the county that yes, the developer is guaranteed water service. So that's a backdrop. As far as changing how that process goes, again, I think we're open to that. It's really a matter that I think the county should address with. The developer should address that with the county as well. And we could be part of that process. The county collects all kinds of fees, and we're one piece of that as far as the water and wastewater. some of the impacts to EID, and again, don't know exactly how this would work, but it sounds like it probably would change the timing of when we receive the FCCs. Maybe we collect a certain portion of it up front and then have to wait until the building permit is issued to collect the remaining part, so we get the overall the same amount, but the timing would be different. It'd likely be a greater administrative effort. You know, we'd have two separate collection processes. We don't know, you know, if we'd be collecting that from two different entities. Usually a developer, you know, builds the initial development, but then they might pass it off to a separate home builder that takes it from there. So we might be trying to work with multiple entities to try to collect the FCCs that we need. And then tracking that, there's a risk, you know, working with the county, that they have their tracking processes, and I would assume it'd be part of that. But there's also, you know, a risk of something dropping, I can just foresee. But anyway, it's something that we could look at. I think it's really should be driven by the county, and we would just be a part of that to see how that would work.
I do have a question, and it probably is not relevant to this, but I'm that way anyway. So currently, you know, through the housing crisis that we have, there's a promotion of building ADUs. Putting an ADU in your back lot for grandma or grandpa, or for another person who is a family, I don't know how that works. Does this count, or is there a separate meter or a separate hookup that happens with the ADU process? There's a lot of them being built now. So just a question, does that impact?
I'm going to
Yeah.
let Mike Brink, he's
Okay.
been part of this FCC study. We haven't mentioned him too, but he's been integral in
Great.
this, and he's our developer
Yeah.
services supervisor.
Hey, good morning, Mike Brink. On ADUs, there was assembly bills or Senate bills that were passed that basically prevents us from charging additional FCCs for an ADU. So those ADUs are fed through the existing meter and sewer service with no additional fees by EID.
Answered, thank you.
Okay, I think we're getting down to the last slide. Yeah, next step. So
I'm sorry, Brian,
Sure.
just wanted to get Jim's input on the request to spread out payment essentially. I get why developers would want it because there's less cash up front, but also you raised logistically and collection-wise, that could create problems. What are your thoughts?
Collect them up front. The risk of not getting paid, I think, could be an issue. And here we are trying to plan major infrastructure improvements, and we start taking the risk of doing that. And if the developer doesn't pay up front, we're taking a risk, and we shouldn't take the risk with our ratepayers.
Okay, so again, I mentioned this is just an informational workshop to get all your comments. We are scheduled for a public hearing to consider adoption of the FCCs on September 23rd. And if that goes forward, we would anticipate that the new FCCs would go into effect January 1st of 2025.
For our consultant, maybe he can answer, or Brian can answer. We currently have about 62,000 acre-feet of water rights in a wet year. We've gone through some extremely dry years where we've had state-mandated reductions in consumption, but we still used about 25,000 acre-feet. And I just wondered, did we, for edification of our audience, did we factor in any kind of proposal or monies to acquire more water rights? And I know that's a pretty much a hard deal to do, but did we actually think about acquiring more water rights?
No, we just looked at infrastructure. We took the master plan that the board adopted and
okay.
took the
I
most
just,
likely projects out of that.
during a dry year, we could be down to 35,000 acre-feet of water, and it's, it could be nip and tuck.
Is there any other board Brian.
Yeah, probably for our consultants. So as we look at legislation and the continued restrictive legislation, is there any factor relevant to that? Or it just all comes with mandates? I mean, I think there's more proposed legislation now, obviously in the conservation proposal, rather than developing water somewhere else. So that all costs more and has to be passed on. Am I wrong there, Jim?
No. The state legislature likes to help our water districts out with additional regulations, and it's hard to predict what that regulation cost is going to be and how we're going to have to deal with it. So it wasn't included in any type of futuristic cost that we embedded in this plan.
Yeah, well, just seeing again, the conservation plan that's been now adopted, and we don't know where that's gonna end up. And, to me, a lot of unfortunate complaining should be at the state level because our hands are almost tied.
I think the biggest thing is the conservation one, and where you have to reduce our use of water from whatever it was, 95 gallons per person per day to 42. That's going to reduce the growth of some of our projects. Is that attainable? I don't know.
Well, and how do we enforce it? The enforcement's on us as well. Yeah.
System-wide, we can't enforce it.
Right.
The people, yeah. There's Pat, did you have?
I'll pass, thanks.
Okay, is there any public comment or question on information item 4? We won't be voting on anything today, but I think we gave some direction. Sir, go ahead. State your name.
Good morning, President Day, members of the board, Chad Roberts at Hefner Law on behalf of Lenore Homes of California, LLC. Appreciate the opportunity to address you this morning. Lenore's
Hold
been-
on for 1 second. Let's make sure if Dan, can you check to make sure that microphone is on?
All right, is this any better here? All right. Lenore's been attempting to work with EID for over 10 years now to ensure that FCCs for age-restricted housing reflect the reasonable cost of service and are compliant with both the Mitigation Fee Act and state and federal case law. Because the data is clear, age-restricted housing uses less water and generates less wastewater as compared to conventional housing. With respect to water, your staff report states, and I'm quoting here, staff found no reasonable nexus for implementing a reduced water FCC solely based on a reduced number of persons per household required for an age-restricted development. To be clear, we aren't asking for a reduced water FCC solely based on the reduced number of persons per household, even though age-restricted housing is limited by state law to effectively 2 persons per household. Instead, we're advocating for a reduced FCC because that's what the data supports, and that's not my opinion. That's staff's. I'm going to read again here. The following is from a February 23rd, 2021 email from Mike Brink to Brian Mueller that we obtained in response to a recent Public Records Act requests. I'm going to quote again. Brian, this relates to Lenore's memo and requests for reduced FCCs for age-restricted housing. We looked at 2 years of data for Carson Creek Unit 1, parentheses, age-restricted, compared to recent development in Promontory, not age-restricted. On average, the non-age-restricted lots use 40% more water than the age-restricted. I need to respond to Lenore's request for meeting, end quote. So EID's own data collected over a 2-year period confirms that conventional housing uses 40% more water than Lenore's existing Carson Creek development. And charging the same FCC as conventional housing for age-restricted housing is not consistent with that data, and it's also not limited to the reasonable cost of providing that service. With respect to wastewater, staff acknowledges there is a nexus between age-restricted housing and significantly reduced wastewater use. And forgive me, I'm going to quote again from your staff report, quote, there is a nexus to support reduced FCCs for wastewater customers, close quote. Yet confoundingly to us, as you just heard, staff recommends against implementing a reduced wastewater FCC for age-restricted developments. And the first reason given is speculation that conventional housing could have reduced future indoor use. That would bring it more in line with age-restricted housing. And regardless of whether such speculation is warranted, it doesn't change the facts as they exist today or your obligation today. And obviously what's funny about that reason is that it acknowledges that there is in fact a significant difference today. Second, with respect to both the water and wastewater FCC, staff raised a vague concern without, I would note, any support about future conversion of age-restricted housing to non-age-restricted housing. And Director Enzini, this goes to your question as well. From our perspective, simply put, that concern is a red herring. These are age-restricted developments under state law that are governed by state law and are required to be deed-restricted in accordance therewith. This isn't, hey, we're going to sell this, this house to someone who's age 55 plus. There are very significant limitations on who can live in that house, and you can't simply change it. It's, like I said, it's deed-restricted. And then finally, as you likely know, a unanimous United Supreme Court recently confirmed in a challenge to El Dorado County's traffic impact fees that legislatively enacted fees are not categorically exempt from the taking clause of the Fifth Amendment. And in a separate case, the Austin case, the El Dorado County Superior Court also just held that El Dorado County and other local agencies must refund millions in mitigation fees for failing to comply with the Mitigation Fee Act. And what we see as we see these decisions is continued concern about our local government agencies misusing their power to burden private property owners with unjustified and excessive fees. And so, in conclusion, we think the data supporting reduced fees for age-restricted housing is clear, and we'd respectfully request that your board provide staff direction to consider the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on this item? I don't see any, and I would just encourage our.
We have folks online.
Oh, we do?
I was just waiting for you.
Sorry, Jennifer. Go ahead. Call one up.
If members of the public would like to address the board, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. We have one gentleman wishing to speak. Please state your name for the record, sir.
Good morning. This is Vance Gerard with the North State Building Industry Association.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you all for allowing me the opportunity to provide comment this morning. I'm grateful that I'm able to follow Chad and his comments because it saves me the effort of voicing the reality that a lot of our requests come from a place that's based in fact and statistics and what we know of our industry and the demand that is created by new homes and age-restricted homes especially. I would challenge you to potentially alter your perception, especially when it comes to age-restricted homes, because these aren't necessarily homes to bring new, older residents to the area, but also think about the fact that there's a lot of people in your community now who are in homes that are too large for them, require too much maintenance, and overall challenges their quality of life to keep up with it. An age-restricted community allows those people to move into a home that suits their lifestyle and where they're at given their time of life, and allows also then younger families who may not be able to afford a new home the ability to buy that existing home and raise their families in the community that they've been longing to be a part of if they haven't already. So I would definitely encourage the board to reconsider their approach to how these fees are being calculated in terms of age-restricted communities. I'll also, in regard to our third point regarding the amount of fees that are paid up front, I've been communicating with staff and we'll send over as well the document that Sacramento County adopted doing just this, limiting the amount of fees that are paid up front, understanding that it provides much more opportunity to invest in the project early and get it moving at a better pace and bring homes to the community that are much needed. So I will continue to be in communication with staff. I'll be readily available for any member of the board who has any questions or would like any additional information. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Jennifer, do we have anyone else?
This is the last call for information, item number 4. If any members of the public would like to address the board, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. President Day, it does not appear there are any additional members of the public wishing to speak on, workshop item number 4.
Okay, thank you. And closing this, I know it's redundant, and I apologize for that, but just to encourage our counselors to, as we continue through this process, to make sure that we're dotting our i's and crossing our t's, and that we're doing it legally, just because in letters and comments, some questions were raised, and I just want to make sure that we're doing it as thoroughly and properly as we can.
President Day, if I may, and thank you for that, I'd like just to maybe take the opportunity briefly to address some of the comments. I want to make sure the board understands that though framed in terms of legal requirements, I think really what Lennar is asking the board to do is make a policy decision. As I said earlier, the standard for legal compliance for capacity charges is whether or not they recover the reasonable costs and have a proportional benefit. That's the standard. So while Mr. Roberts, point well taken on the red herring associated with changing these in the future, because I appreciate that, and I think that he's probably right. But I will push back a little bit to say that reference to the United States Supreme Court decision in Sheets and this recent El Dorado County Superior Court decision in the Austin case, which, by the way, Mr. Roberts was kind enough to send to me yesterday, that too is a red herring because in Austin, the issue that the county dealt with there was whether or not its development impact fees, its traffic impact fees, complied with provisions of the Mitigation Fee Act, which do not apply to capacity charges. And the statute is very specific about that, so that case is irrelevant. As far as the Sheets case, the United States Supreme Court decision, yeah, the court said that local fees aren't categorically exempt from the constitutional prohibition against taking property without just compensation. Well, okay, I don't see that case applying in this particular instance either, so long as the fees in question meet the legal standard under the Mitigation Fee Act, which I have previously described. So again, the issue here is a policy one, it's not a legal one. Does the board feel it necessary for policy reasons to provide a discount to communities that are age restricted in light of some of the anecdotal evidence we have, which was quoted, that some age-restricted communities may use less water indoors than others that don't, that are not age-restricted. That's a policy issue for the board to decide, but it's not a legal one.
Thank you. I'm glad you took that up. So I think that closes our workshop on item 4. We are now going to take a break and go into closed session for closed session B. And this is hard to estimate a time because it could be short, could be long, we don't know. It would.
If I may, I just need to do my legal obligation here to make up an announcement that the board will be meeting in closed session to consider the items that are listed on today's agenda. It will first take up out of order closed session B as it's reflected on today's agenda, and I anticipate that the board's consideration of that at this point in the meeting will require approximately 20 minutes. As you indicated, it could be longer than that. But I think it's safe to say that the board's discussion of this item will require at least 20 minutes.
I agree. And so we will return no sooner than 11:45, but it could be after that.
And for the purpose of this meeting, I will not shut it down. All I'll do is mute it, so you'll see a black screen. You won't have to log off and we'll reconvene.
And Jim and Jamie, if you could just stay on standby, we may ask you, want to ask
Okay,
you some
let's go
questions.
ahead and put this on pause.
All right, we're back in session, and we'll continue those items for, at the end of the meeting as well, the closed sessions. We're now ready for information item number 5.
And today, my name is Nicole Graham, and I'm the Environmental Compliance Supervisor here at the district. Today, Patrick Wilson and I will be presenting the first and final update to the lead service line inventory project. Next slide. Okay, sorry. So you may remember us being here before in April of last, or in March of last year. At that time, we provided an information item to the board regarding the district's plan to comply with the federal lead and copper rule revisions. In that presentation, we provided a very in-depth presentation on the rules, the regulations, why the regulations were changed, as well as how the district was planning to comply, how much we wanted to spend, and lastly, what kind of public outreach we were going to do to let the public know about this project. Before I move on, I just wanted to give you just a small little idea of how this presentation is going to go. I'm going to give you just a brief update on the regulations again, so we're all on the same page, and let you know how we complied. And then Patrick will take over and let you know what we found, what we spent, and what the last items we need to do. And just a little bit of a spoiler alert, it's a good news story, and we will not be asking for any more money. Yay!
Yay!
Next slide. Okay, so the summary issues are the U.S. EPA required through the lead and copper rule revisions, required all public water systems to inventory water service lines on both the upstream of the meter, which is the public side, and downstream of the meter, which is the customer side. And the goal is to locate all lead service lines and any galvanized requiring replacement, which I'll explain a little bit further later on in the presentation. The report, or status report, is due by October 16, 2024. And status report is kind of important. It means that we don't have to finish the project, but if we're not finished and we don't know, there's a lead status unknown, we would be required to let those customers know that we don't know what the material is and provide them information about the possibility of drinking water contaminated with lead. And we would be required to submit that letter every year until we know. So we were really motivated to have this report completed so we wouldn't have to send out those kind of messages. Next slide. Okay, so now about the regulation. So the lead and copper rule revisions was promulgated by the EPA in January of 21, and it became effective in December 16th of 2021. The LCRR revised the existing rule adopted in 91 and introduced several new rules, new compliance and reporting requirements for water systems in the United States. I wanted to take just a moment to talk to you about the original lead and copper rule in 91. It's the only rule that water systems are required to demonstrate compliance inside people's homes at their kitchen tap. And the reason for that is even in the 90s, we knew that water contaminated with lead was had high potential risk for infants and children. But we also knew that the sources of lead in drinking water could be the service line owned by the utility, but it could also be the service line owned by the customer and also plumbing fixtures inside the home. So this rule was required to sort of look at that, and there were things that water agencies could do to minimize the amount of lead leaching into drinking water. Things like corrosion control technologies, what the district does do. And since we began monitoring in the 90s, the district has always been in compliance with the lead and copper rule. Next slide. Okay, so the intent of the LCRR is to locate and address all lead service lines for eventual replacement. So any lead service line that we find that's owned by the utility, we would be required to replace. any utility, any service line owned by the customer, we are not required to replace, but we should advise them on potential monies available to them to help them replace those service lines. We are required to look for 4 categories on these service lines. Lead service lines, which is pretty self-explanatory, galvanized requiring replacement, or GRR, lead, non-lead, and lead status unknown. The one that you may not know is about galvanized requiring replacement. So you want to look at a galvanized line and know what's upstream of that line. If it's currently lead, the galvanized needs to be replaced because chances are some lead could fleck off and stay in that galvanized. Or if it ever was connected to a lead service line. And that one can be a little bit tricky to know what the history of a service line is for 40, 50 years. So there's that. Next slide. Okay, so what kind of methods could we use to do this inventory? Well, the EPA gave us several approved ones we could just go ahead and do. We could look at historical records. We could look at the date of the service line installation. So if your state had a lead ban for installed, which in California was in 1986, you could just say based on the age of the service line, it may not have any lead service line and be made of lead. You could do a physical inspection, just look at the service line, is it lead? Or you could use pipe diameter. So anything that's 4 inches or above will not be lead service line based on when you use lead. Other things we could use is sampling, which would be like sampling inside people's home, their drinking water. You could use predictive modeling, you could use interviews, and you could use interpolation. So interpolation for this one example is you could look at a large set of service lines and then do a small statistical investigation of a few of those and make a decision of whether the larger subset is either lead or non-lead. And you want to do that with enough sampling or looking at those to give a 95% confidence value. And we definitely did that, and I'll explain a little bit more. Okay, so these are things we could do. Next slide. So this is how we actually completed the inventory. So we submitted to the Division of Drinking Water a quality assurance program plan for approval. So it had some things that we were allowed to do and some things that we need to ask for approval for. That plan was submitted in March or May of last year, and it got approved in about 30 days, which we were pretty excited about, so we could keep moving forward. And what we said is that on the district side, we had enough records to say what the material was. And we also used interviews and used records to determine if we thought there was ever any lead service lines to deal with those GRRs, and we determined that we probably never used lead in the systems from the very beginning. On the customer side, we said this is how we're going to do it. We're going to use service line age, we're going to use size of pipe, we're going to use records, and we're going to use that interpolation. No worries, no worries. Okay, no, no worries.
Okay.
All right.
Let's keep moving.
Understood. All right, so the first thing we did is we decided to take our service lines and put them into 6 categories. Category 1 is small water systems, and that's our Outingdale and Strawberry. Then we looked at category 2, service lines that were built between 88 or newer. We looked at service lines that were 86 or 87. We looked at homes that were 50 years, were put in 50s or older. And then we used this category of service lines that were installed between 51 and 85. And then we did have some service lines where we just didn't have enough information. And what we decided to do is the small water systems, we were just going to actually inspect every single one of them. And the reason for that is when we submitted the plan for approval, we didn't know if they were going to accept it. So we said, well, look at all small water systems. We're going to figure out if our public outreach is working properly. We're going to figure out if we're properly training our staff to identify lead. We're going to make sure of all the field crews that we were putting out there with their tablets and that approach was working correctly. And then we would also be able to verify that their records were accurate. So we just thought that would be a good place to start. Everything you figure out what we're doing is working. And then for anything that was 88 or newer, we're going to call it non-lead. And then for 86, 87, we weren't sure if Division of Drinking Water was going to say, oh, there might be some overflow of inventory. There might be some lead. So we want you to look at that. So we just kind of were going to know what that number was in case we had to go back and look at them, but we already planned to not look at them because we figured the lead ban was in place. For 50 and older, we knew that the national data would indicate if you're going to have lead, that's probably the service lines that are going to be made of lead. And then for 51 to 85, we're going to look at a few of them to make decisions about the larger amounts. And then for missing and build date, we were just going to have to go look at those. So if you look at that, we have roughly 43,000 service lines. I always find the data sort of interesting, as you can kind of see when the district starts getting built out. So there was a lot of new development starting in 88 or newer. So about half of our service lines were built after the lead ban. Okay, next slide. A little more about those number of inspections we're going to do. So we said that we would break those service lines into 5-year gaps. We didn't think the Division of Drinking Water would say 30 years of installation was all the same material. So we said 5 years gaps seemed really good. We said it's probably the same developer putting them in, probably getting the inventory for the same locations. So we felt really comfortable with that because we didn't have any other agencies to sort of look at. So we kind of had to figure out on our own. So we thought that seemed really good and reasonable. So if you look at that, you can kind of see that if we could have had to look at 14,000, but we got it down to 2,000. You might see that sometimes there's large blocks, but you don't see the direct correlation of more inspections. And for a 95% confidence value, there seems to be the curve value sort of flattens out as you deal with more larger groups. That's just kind of how it works out. So that's kind of how we did that. We were planning on doing we did about 2,044 inspections, way better than 14,000. And I also think it can give our customers a sense of comfort that we actually did the project trying to find the lead service lines. So next slide. Yeah. Okay. So this is how the actual amount of inspections we end up doing. Like I said, we're going to look at Outingdale, so that's actually 300. We were able to look for all the older homes, 50. We did about 1,215. Those categories between 51 and 85, we did 2,044. And then the missing bill date, we did about 1,000. So roughly 4,600 opposed to 43,000, which is about a 10 to 11% inspections of what we did. And when we did the inspections, we did it on the customer side as well as the utility side. And we just did that so we could say we looked at that, and that also helped us verify that our records were accurate by using the same confidence value of inspection. So it was 2 points of inspections that field crews did. Next slide. And just a little bit closer at the numbers. So when we came to you in 2023, we said worst case, we would do about 19,000 inspections. We thought with our plan, we would do 7,000 inspections, but we were able to get it down in real time in the field to 4,682. And you might wonder where we saved those inspections. That's in category 6. So when we submitted the plan, we used our records, and we were looking about 3,000 missing build dates. But staff went back to the records. They went through aerial imaging around those times to figure out if there was actually a structure there. And they were able to get that down to about 2,000, roughly 2,000 inspections. So kudos to staff, because it really saved the district time and money. All right. So I've given you the why we're there and how we're going to do it. And I'm going to pass it on to Patrick now to the what did we find. Thank you.
Nice. Patrick Wilson, Drinking Water Operations Manager. Little show and tell today. So we'll kind of move left to right. So bottom left, as Nicole was mentioning, you know, we're having to locate these meters physically out in the field. And quite often, the top left photo was more likely. As we move to radio reads, you know, across the district, as those meters are read through that infrastructure just by simply driving by, a lot of overgrowth tends to happen. So we had to reflect on going through our CMMS programming and looking through not only the meter notes, but any sort of potential photos that were documented from years past, and utilizing those to locate it. Just for reference, Sean, who's standing up there, he's 6'2", so that's not a short plant that he had to work his way through. And then on the lower right, we also found some uninvited guests that needed to be, exterminated, moved out. That was, more common than not. We ran into a lot of bugs, obviously, pulling those off. That was certainly an anomaly, finding a rattlesnake. But ultimately, as Nicole mentioned, our goal was to take the photos that are kind of shown in the middle there, looking for district side and then the customer side and documenting that. So we took all those photos and we logged all those photos, next slide, into a GIS platform that allowed us remote capability utilizing an iPad in the field to generate basically these two pie charts. This is just for the Strawberry system, just for reference. We have one for Outingdale and for the main system. But effectively, it shows what's on the customer side on the left, and then on the right-hand side, what's on the district. And as you can see, there's pretty evenly distributed kind of across the board in both facets. You know, we have a little bit of polyethylene, a little bit of copper, but all that data that we collected went into being logged into this platform so that we could actually generate, in the event that we ever did find lead in our system, which we did not during this, an online map that we would have had to create, as Nicole had spoken to, and I'll get to a little bit later. Next slide. So the project outcome, as I just mentioned, the district, we did complete our inventory. We did not find any lead service lines requiring replacement or galvanized requiring replacement. And we ultimately were able to say that no services remained as lead status unknown. The district can certify that we have no lead service lines at this time. Next slide. So the project costs. So as Nicole had mentioned very well, you know, we started with 19,000 potential inspections back in 2023, and we had anticipated a number of inspections to be 7,000 back later in 2023. And ultimately, we were able to work that down to the 4,600 number. Well, how did we get there financially? The labor, obviously, that dropped off through time. The vehicle cost actually was a little bit off. When we originally had looked at that, we were looking at smaller size pickups to complete the work, but because we utilized those two trailered Vector units, we actually had to rent a larger truck, two larger pickups to be able to pull those, so that cost was a little bit off. And we also added some costs to the miscellaneous tools, and that was for some GPS transponders and some other equipment that we needed. Those GPS points, from that photo from before of Sean standing next to the bush, are going to be invaluable going forward. Meter notes will be somewhat a thing of the past for anything of the meters that we went to. We collected GPS points for 100% of the meters that we touched. And then the final cost, we ended up about $200,000 under the budget. And just I've mentioned, it's an unfunded federal mandate. We are working through right now looking at the state revolving fund to see if we qualify for potential reimbursement for the efforts that we put in place. So we're working internally to submit an application for that. Next slide. So when a water system does not have the lead service line or does not have a lead service line or galvanized requiring replacement or lead status unknown, it can declare itself lead-free. As Nicole had mentioned previously, this is very important because it did not require us to send that letter to any of those potential customers 30 days before the submission of the report and thereafter. So we would be doing an annual letter to those customers until they showed proof that those had been replaced. So fortunately, we don't have to do that. Next slide. So our public outreach, our planned communication, so we're working with Jesse to do an article on the waterfront. We'll also do an article in the newspaper, a dedicated EID webpage that'll say that there are no lead service lines found. And we'll also do a social media post as well. Next slide. So what remains? So we still need to submit our report to DDW. Our plan is to do that by mid-September. And then we're going to prepare a notification of inventory results for the public outreach. And then public outreach will go out 30 days from the report submission whenever we do submit that final report to DDW. And the deadline for that is October 16th. Our plans are to have that done long before then. Are there any questions?
How did they do the sampling? How did an inspector do the sampling? Just a question.
In the field sampling?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we kind of went both, we utilized not only the vectors that we had, which were invaluable in some of the circumstances where there was asphalt and concrete, and allowed us to do just a really, a 3-inch hole in that concrete and asphalt to do a small restoration. But on the sites where they were in the middle of nowhere in the vector, we were unable to get it to that location. hand tools, shovels, and basically exposing it. And to my knowledge, we had very few, if any, damaging of any sort of infrastructure during that inspection, even with the shoveling using
Great.
those hand tools. Yeah.
Thank you.
What were you looking at and for? So you don't expose the meter. So then would you be looking to see what kind of line was connected to it?
Correct. Yeah, we had to do enough so that in that photo that I presented, that we could actually show the state, hey, this is this material service classification, and be able to reference it. Yeah, we found, I think the most important takeaway that we had from it was that our staff was able to utilize the plan that we had initially submitted to the Division of Drinking Water and follow those guidelines, and were successful in identifying the material in the at each individual site based off of the training that we provided them. So we were able to follow that plan and that we had submitted to DDW.
And if you find a pipe that's fine, would you test the water like inside the house, or you wouldn't have to in that case?
No, this was just an inventory of the service lines themselves, yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, first, I guess, like you said, this is an example of one of those unfunded mandates that comes down and impacts the district and our finances. Fortunately, in this case, not severely. But I'd like to say congratulations on a successful completion, and to Nicole and you for providing an alternative to the mandate that said, let's do a sampling with a 95% confidence level. That ended up saving the district a lot of money, and also it reduced the impact on our customers by disrupting whatever, getting to the meter on their property and raising this concern. So I'd just like to say thanks, good job, successful project. Okay, let's put it in the books and move on.
Just to back up what Pat's saying, the public doesn't understand the number of federal and state mandated audits that we have to do. And it's just, it's almost a daily thing. There was something else comes along, so, and it's reflected in our rates. We have to recuperate our costs in order to do that, so. Huh? Yeah, recuperate, yeah.
I just want to echo Pat's comments, I think on a job well done, and also highlight that you tested virtually everything of the older homes, older properties, and I think that creates a really high level of assurance. I understand doing the statistical probability on the newer developments, but I think it was excellent to get out there and virtually get 100% of all those older homes. That's great. So again, good job and good news. And yeah, I wouldn't want to be sending any letters, unknown letters. That scares people.
Nor the snake picture.
No, and not the snake picture. But you, of course, catch and release, right? Yeah, okay.
Relocation.
Yes. All right. Is there any public comment on item 5?
If members of the public would like to address the board on information item number 5, please refer to page 2 of today's agenda. President Day, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to speak on information item number 5.
All right. Thank you. All right. We'll move on to the exciting item number 6.
Financials are always exciting. Okay, yes. Okay, good morning, President Day, members of the board. I'm Jamie Bandy, Director of Finance, and I'm here first this morning to present a financial update for our June 30th, 2024 period ending. So our first slide, we're going to take a look at the district's revenues. What we have on the spreadsheet today are two things. If you look at the three columns on the right-hand side, we're looking at the June 30 actuals as compared to the 6-month budgeted for 2024. And then an additional comparison, that same time period, looking back at last year, 2023. So overall, we'll focus on 2024 first. So total district revenues, we are at about 57, just under 57 million for the first half of the year. Comparing that to our 6-month budget, you can see that we are about 8 million, just under 9 million higher. And then also looking back at 23, we're about 7 million higher than we were this time last year. This, looking at the individual categories, is primarily related to the board-approved rate increases in December, as well as some higher revenue in our hydropower sales that we had not originally anticipated. Next slide, please. Taking a look at the operating expenses, the same format, looking at current year, June 30th, as compared to the 6-month budgeted, and then as well as the comparison to last year in 23. So the current year expenses at about 27, just under 28 million. Comparing it to the 6-month budgeted, it is a little bit lower than what is budgeted for the 6-month period. However, our expenses typically trend a little bit higher the second half of the year. So while we're at about 44% of the year, we are on track for the expenses. Actual expenses year over year are at about $3.6 million higher. And looking again at the individual categories, this is primarily due to personnel increases and then also just increases across the board to the necessary services and materials. Next slide, please. And then the last couple of slides of today's update, what I will be presenting is staff has updated, made some revisions to the 5-year forecast that we brought in December with the budget. Specifically, when on the next couple of slides, we'll look at that forecast, but specifically in 2024, just in this first year, we have already seen higher revenue coming in for our hydroelectric revenue, our investment income, our property tax, as well as our FCCs. And then there's an update to the proposed bond issuance in the first year. And then looking at the outer years, we've made some updates to the revenue projections for both our property tax and our FCCs. So next slide, Jen. So looking at this, and I'll go through this individually. So again, this is our 5-year forecast. The only items that we have updated on here, if we look at the first column for 2024, the very first line are total debt proceeds. The forecast that we brought in December originally showed 60 million for the bond issuance, so that has been updated to 70 million. Our total revenues at 108, that previously was at 106 million. So again, that's related to the hydroelectric, the investment, the property taxes. And then that's the only change for current year 24. And then again, as I stated in the outer years, the property tax has been updated. And then if we look at the bottom of this chart, almost all the way down to where the blue and red numbers, so that's the projections for our FCCs. So development estimates are trending a little bit higher than what we originally forecasted. So we did make some adjustments to the outer years. Altogether, the increase for the 5-year period is about $13 million to what we had seen previously. And staff does still feel that this is a conservative estimate at this time. The next two slides are the same 5-year forecast, just broken out between the water utility and the wastewater utility individually. And that concludes my formal presentation, just providing some information today. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Yes, sir.
Has the municipal bond rate moderated or slightly come down since, I think this will affect future boards' decisions and what our rate increases would be. Is that a fact?
That's correct. Yeah, I think we initially, in projections, over the last year, we were looking upwards of 6% on the on the bond issuance. That is maybe about 4.5% or 5% today. Again, that is something that really until the time of issuance, it's hard to say exactly what that will be.
It looks like we could be going into a recession. That will affect our revenue on our demand side. But anyway, okay.
Director Anzini? No? Okay. Thank you. Any other comments? Any public comment?
If members of the public would like to address the board on information item number 6, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. Vice President Dwyer, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on information item number 6.
Great. Thank you. And thank you, Jamie. It's good to know we're in a solid financial position, so thank you.
All right, did we get back to public comment?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so now we're ready to move to action item number 7. Jamie, you get to go again.
It's just a warrant registers.
Oh, sorry.
Director Veerkamp? Oh,
Where am I?
action item number 7.
Oh, okay.
On the
Sorry.
bottom of page
Sorry,
4.
That's distracted. All right, do I hear a motion?
Move one.
We have a motion and a second. Any,
President Day, I will be recusing myself on this item.
all right, Director Veerkamp will be recusing himself. Is there any public comment on item 7? Do we have anybody online?
I had to remember to block out because he's recusing himself, so it just takes a second. If members of the public would like to address the board on action item number 7, please refer to page 2 of today's agenda. President President Day.
It's all right.
It appears there are no members of the public wishing to speak on action item number 7. Option 1 moved by Director Osborne and seconded by Director Dwyer, with Director Veerkamp recusing himself. I believe that we are ready for the vote.
All right, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries.
All right, now we'll move on to item 8.
Okay, good morning again. Jamie Bandy, Finance Director. I am now here to present the district's fiscal year 2023 annual audit review. So just for clarification and kind of switching our thought process, the update I just gave was for our current year financials, and now we're going to take a step back and we're going to be looking at our fiscal year 2023 actual information. Okay, so the board does receive and file the annual audit each year, as well as the report on applying agreed upon procedures related to the appropriations limit. Next slide. So the independent auditor's report. So Mays and Associates did issue an unmodified or clean opinion stating that the financial statements were presented fairly in all material respects. the respective financial position of the district for December 31st, both 2023 and 2022, and the respective changes in financial position and cash flows for the fiscal year. And most importantly here is to know that an unmodified opinion is the highest level of assurance that an auditor can provide for the agency. And then just some background information. I wanted to look at what is the district's responsibility when completing an audit, as well as what is an auditor's responsibility in the process. So we first take a look at the district's responsibility. We are responsible for providing annual financial statements in accordance with the generally accepted accounting principles, as well as government auditing standards. We do contract with a professional firm to perform an independent audit each year to ensure that we are meeting that goal of compliance. And Mays & Associates did perform the fiscal year 23 financial audit for the district. So what is the auditor's responsibility in this process? They're responsible to express an opinion on the financial statements based on their audit, and also to issue a report on the internal controls and the compliance with the laws and regulations that we must follow. Okay, so Mays & Associates did not identify any deficiencies in the district's internal control that they considered to be a material weakness. Likewise, they did not identify any instances of non-compliance or other matters that are required to be reported. They did, however, identify 3 significant deficiencies, and a significant deficiency is defined as less severe than a material weakness, yet important enough to merit attention by those that are responsible with governance. So kind of in the middle of our slide here, the 3 areas that they identified are a timely and accurate year-end close, our compliance with California Code 53646 related to timely submissions of our treasurer's report, so the quarterly investment reports that we bring to the board, and also timely preparation of our bank reconciliations. So just to speak to those a little bit, specifically all 3 of those are related to significant staff turnover within the finance department. Staff has already been addressing these issues. The vacated positions have all been filled, and even more importantly than that, in the finance department, we've been able to cross-train multiple other staff so that in the event of any future turnover, the impact would be less. And that we would be able to continue with
Yeah, Jamie,
operations.
just to be clear, those 3 findings have to do with the timeliness of action, not the accuracy of the reports.
Correct.
you.
All time issues. So the year-end close, staff should be bringing the audit report to the board within 180 days of the year-end close. So that would mean that we should have been here before June 30th. The treasurer's report, the code indicates that report should be brought to the board within 30 days of the quarter year-end date. And then also with the bank reconciliations, best practice obviously is just to have those completed within 30 days also of the month-end close. So they all have been completed. They have all been checked for accuracy, reviewed, and audited. It was simply a timing issue on when we completed those in 2023.
Are we on track to stay on time?
Yes, we are. And that's actually my next bullet on here. The other piece of information that I just wanted to share is what we've done to ensure that moving forward is that we are focused on documenting our processes better than what we have had in the past. And that includes creating tasks and timeline, checklists, just to make sure that we are meeting all of those requirements. And then lastly, staff is committed to completing future audits within the 180 days of the fiscal year end close. Okay, so now we will take a look at our actual financial financial reports. The next couple of slides, we'll look at some highlights, and then we'll move into the actual reports themselves. So starting with our total assets and deferred outflows, they did exceed our total liabilities and deferred inflows by $473 million in 2023. So that's looking at the district's net position. Our capital assets, net of accumulated depreciation, totaled $845 million. The operating revenues for 2023 increased by about $1.5 million, or just under 2%, to a total of 73.6 million. I'm sorry, 273.6 from 2022. And then lastly, our property tax revenue also increased about $2.5 million. Okay, looking at our FCCs, they, for 2023, were just over $10.5 million, which was just a slight decrease from 2021. Operating expenses, excluding depreciation, increased by just about $10.5 million, or almost 17% in 23. So again, just the same story that we've been sharing, just the across-the-board increases to our expenses. And then the last two bullets looking at our looking at the district's total debt service coverage. So including our FCCs, our total was 2.07, a decrease from 2022. And again, this is primarily related to the increase in expenses, the overall increase to expenses. And then looking at that same ratio without our FCCs, we were at 1.46. Again, a slight decrease from 2022. And the fine print on both of those, the district's required bond covenant minimum with the FCCs is 1.25, so we are still well above the minimum requirement there. Okay, now we'll take a look at our actual our audited actuals as compared to what we budgeted for the year. So the actual operating revenues were $73.6 million, which was $2.3 million higher than we initially budgeted. Looking at the expenses, so the actual operating expenses do not include non-cash or non-budgeted pension and OPEB, and the total for 2023 was just under $64 million, so it was just slightly lower than we had budgeted. And then again, looking at the FCC revenue, it was, again, just slightly higher than what we had budgeted. And then the last bullet on here, I just wanted to provide an update for, as of December 31st, the district has recovered $22.1 million through our insurance claim related to the Caldor fire disaster. We did learn last week that we will be receiving another $1 million from the insurance reimbursement. That still leaves an outstanding $10 to $11 million that we are seeking reimbursement through FEMA. However, there's no guarantee that we will receive it or any timeline that we may receive that reimbursement. Okay, so now we'll take a look at the actual reports. The first one that we will look at is our statement of net position. Again, if you look at the report on the left all the way down at the bottom, our total net position for 2023 was $473.3 million, just about 1.5% lower than it was from the previous year. Okay, and now this slide we're looking at our total cash and investments. I want to point out a few things on this one. So in 2022, the district essentially appropriately drew down our cash reserves, our unrestricted cash reserves, in response to the Caldor fire emergency. So in 22, our cash position is a little bit higher, but if you notice, the restricted cash amount is still pretty significant in 22. Looking then comparing 22 to 23, the changes that directly impact that are a few different things. So when we first received our insurance reimbursement from the Caldor fire, those funds were recorded into our restricted cash. In 2023, we reallocated those funds from the restricted into our unrestricted pot of money. Another thing that we typically do is we typically use some of the FCC revenue to cover debt service payments. We did not do that, however, in '22. Again, we just used the cash for those. And so another reallocation that we made in '23 was just moving those funds from the restricted cash to cover what we had drawn down in our unrestricted. Let's see. Yeah. So overall, again, you'll see the main difference here is really just overall cash. It was really just kind of moving buckets. So the total cash position is really just reallocating the restricted funds to the unrestricted. Okay. So moving on to our capital assets, as I stated earlier, the total capital assets for 2023 equaled $845 million. And then on the bottom of this slide is just some examples of our major capital asset additions. And as we talk about regularly, the district has a pretty significant amount of assets that need to be maintained. And so this is kind of where we see those numbers. Okay, looking at our debt portfolio, on the slide here is just each of our loans or each of our debt issuances listed out, and our total debt for 2023 was just under $407 million as compared to 2022 at $423, and of course that is just a result of making those debt service payments throughout the year. Looking at our net pension liability, down towards the second to the bottom line, our total net pension for 2023 was 9.1. As you can see, that's just a little bit slightly higher than 2022. And about middle of the page, the employer and employee compensation, if you notice from 22, 80.3, dropping down to 3.9. That's related to the pension bond issuance, so relieving some of that payment in this category and obviously transferring it to our debt service. Okay, next slide. So now looking at our other post-employment benefits, or OPEB, for 2023, 26.3, which has remained fairly consistent and fairly flat from the year prior. All right, moving on, looking at some more reports, our statements of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position. Kind of similar information that we looked at with just a little bit of the detail, slightly different on this one. I like this report. The net position, again, for end of 2023, $473.3 million. But if you look at the expenses category, the second category on the report, that's where you, again, really see the difference. The decrease in our net position is related to the increase of our overall operating costs. And so you can see kind of there in that, the operating costs, the significant increase year over year. All right, same story, looking at the expenses again individually. The total expenses from 22 to 23, there was about a just under 20% increase. And again, looking at the categories, our personnel increases as well as our operating supplies really had the largest, our chemicals as well, really had the largest increase year over year. Okay. And then just looking at our operating income and really kind of measuring the performance. Our depreciation and amortization at the bottom of the screen for 2023 was just under $10 million. And really the takeaway from this slide is that's a fairly low operating income for our utility. Now we'll look at some financial ratios that just kind of tell our story in another format. So First, I wanted to point out, looking at our credit rating. So the district's current rating are indicated in the red font. So we are still in the high grade for the rating tiers. And the district was just reaffirmed with S&P at that credit rating earlier this summer. Okay, so looking at our debt service coverage, again, the bolded figures will be what we just reported a couple of slides ago. So debt service coverage with FCCs, a total for 2023 was 2.07. And at the bottom there, where Jen has highlighted, the district's overall debt service coverage ratio is below the national median of 2.40, and this is a standard from AWWA for combined utilities. And we'll look at that a little bit more in a couple of slides. So now looking at our debt to operating revenues ratio, the district is currently at a 5.24. Again, looking at the comparison at the bottom, we do exceed the national median of 2.0, or 2.10 rather. The takeaway here is that the district relies on debt. It's necessary to maintain the district's infrastructure. And what we will see on some of these other slides, though, does support that the district does continue to maintain the ability to make those debt service payments and to afford the debt that we're taking on. Okay, next slide. Now, our days cash on hand. So essentially looking at our unrestricted cash and what our operating expenses are, and really depicting, if nothing changed, how many days of operation could we continue? So the district currently is looking at 217 days, which again, looking at the national standard, is lower than the median of 451 days. Again, the Caldor fire emergency had a huge impact on our cash flow. The district was very fortunate to have those reserves available to be able to respond to the emergency and then work through, following years to recover from that. And the district is currently working to build those reserves back up to be prepared again for the future for any other unforeseen emergencies. Okay, so our, what page are we on? Okay, so the asset condition. So again, just kind of looking at overall, what is the district's infrastructure and really what is the life cycle of the infrastructure that we have. So we are currently looking at 32 years as our average life cycle on our infrastructure, which again does exceed the national median of 26 years. And again, as this is defined, this just continues to support the importance of why we need to invest in our capital projects and why we need to repair and maintain and replace our infrastructure more timely than we have. Yes?
I think this really demonstrates at a national comparison level that we really need to focus on upgrading and modernizing our infrastructure. This really drives it home that we're still playing catch up. It's certainly not economically possible to do everything at once, but we need to be making progress, steady progress in that direction.
Correct, thank you. Okay, and then again, just kind of looking at our debt to capitalization ratio, while we see that the district's total debt, we do have a significant amount of debt. However, this slide is also just showing once again that even at 44% for that debt to capitalization ratio, the district is still within the strong range, which is identified between 35% to 50%. So again, just demonstrating our ability to still afford the debt that we're taking on. And then just reiterating from the beginning of the presentation, Mays and Associates did perform the agreed upon procedures related to the calculation of the 2023 appropriations limit and did not identify any findings. And then before I move on to the board options, that does complete the formal presentation of the final reports, financial reports rather. I did want to share that David Alvey is here today from Mays and Associates and is also available for questions, and I think he has a few things that he'd like to share. Yeah.
Good morning, President Day and members of the board. My name is David Alvey. I'm a CPA and audit partner at Mays and Associates. And I just kind of want to give an overview of what my role is in this process. My role, as Jamie said, is to come in and to issue a report, opinion on whether or not we feel at my firm that the financials presented for you today are free from material misstatement due to fraud or error. And I'm pleased to say that on page 1 of the report, it is an unmodified opinion, the highest level of assurance that we can give, and that actually requires a lot of work. And just a really quick overview, we start our audit in 2 phases. We have 2 phases. We have an interim phase where we're looking at checks and balances. We're looking at internal controls. We want to ensure that not a single person can initiate, approve, and book a transaction without somebody else looking at it. And that was back earlier in the year that we did that phase. And then once we get an idea of the segregation of duties and the bones of the internal control structure, then we turn our brain to final phase. Now we're looking at balances, material balances, making sure that your cash is correct, that your depreciation schedules are accurate, that your bond disclosures are correct, and that sort of thing. We send out confirmations to your banks, to your legal counsel, to your debt holders to make sure that everything is being recorded properly. And after we do all of our work for those major areas that we identify during our planning phase, we issue our manager representation letter, which is signed by management, that says they've given us everything in full faith, not withholding any information from us, and then that's our opinion date. So that's a really quick 20,000-foot view of the financial process. We also issue what's called a memorandum on internal controls and required communication, and that's my communication from my firm to this board of things that we found during the audit. Like Jamie said, we had no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. We did have those 3 significant deficiencies about the cash bank, the compliance with the government code, and the timely closing. And then we also have a section called Other Matters. And all we have in there is just updates from GASB, Government Accounting Standards Boards, of pronouncements that are coming down for the next couple of years. We also have in that document the required communication. I'm required to tell you that we had no issues with management's accounting assumptions for fair market value of capital assets or of cash or depreciation or even the assumptions in your pension and other post-employment benefits. We had no scope limitations. We don't think management was limiting our scope for our audit, and no difficulties in the process at all for that. And with that, I just want to thank Jamie for all of her hard work and her finance team, and open up to any questions you might have about the audit process.
Any questions? I don't see the board. Laurie?
Actually, a question for Ms. Bandy, and thank you very much for giving us a blessing, as you would say. But how, you had mentioned earlier about how we're going to increase our reserves. Will you come back to us someday and tell us how we're going to increase those reserves that we're down in?
Yes, absolutely. Part of that is with our financial updates. One of the things I should have mentioned earlier when I was presenting the financial update was just to add in the weeks coming, we are going to be preparing our 25-26 budget. And so I can also bring some of that information at that time as part of that process.
Okay, thank you. I'll be looking forward to that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, I'd just like to say congratulations to you and the finance team for a clean audit. That's a major accomplishment. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. And I would just like to add a very special thank you as well to my staff, specifically Madison Franklin, Administrative Analyst, Caleb Akers, our accountant, as well as Sarah Kaysen, our Finance and Accounting Manager. So everybody has made great contributions to this process. Thank you all.
Great, thank you. Is there any public comment on this item?
Hold on for 1 second, Director Day.
Yes. Oh, sorry.
Okay, so
That's right.
moving forward to our
Oh, we
board
gotta vote on
options.
it?
Option 1, receive and file the 2023 annual audit and 2023 report on applying agreed-upon procedures related to the appropriations limit. And staff recommends option 1.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. I'm off my game this morning. Is there any public comment on this item?
If members of the public would like to address the board on action item number 8, please refer to the detailed instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. President Day, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on action item number 8, option 1, moved by Director Osborne and seconded by Director Dwyer. I believe we're ready for the vote.
All right, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 voting aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, and we're moving on to item number 9.
Good afternoon, board members. My colleague Judy Calvert and I, Kristen Vinton, both human resource analysts with the district, will be presenting the temporary employee and payroll services contract. So previously, on October 12, 2021, Blue Ribbon Personnel Services was awarded a 3-year contract in the not-to-exceed annual amount of $618,052. It's important to note that Talmo Incorporated purchased Blue Ribbon Personnel Services in December of 2022, and so transferred over our contract to them. Our current contract expires on October 31st, 2024. We use temporary employee and payroll services to meet the demand of our peak workloads, employee absences, and special projects. Our recreation division currently utilizes about 93% of the district's need between the months of March and October. This chart shows the actual cost per year for 2021, 2022, and 2023. There are some fluctuations due to the local economy, recruitment challenges, and the increased state minimum wage. In anticipation of the current contract expiring, we posted a request for proposals, an RFP, on our district website. We also reached out to local providers and published an addendum to questions that were asked. We received 19 proposals from various agencies throughout the United States. HR and purchasing reviewed and ranked the proposals using the following criteria: qualifications and experience providing temporary staffing, ability to staff remote locations and meet our staffing needs, proposed pricing, and employment law for state and federal related to temporary staffing.
As Kristen mentioned, we looked at 19 different proposals. We selected the top 4. Out of the top 4, we had Athena, Trifecta, Clovity, and Bolt Staffing. The current contract amount with Talmo Inc., not to exceed the annual amount of $618,052. After analyzing all the bids, we selected Trifecta from the top 4. The proposal from Trifecta.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Why did, because they were the second lowest bidder, not the lowest bidder.
That is true.
Is there,
So the reason being was Athena their headquarters is based in Maryland. Although in their proposal, they mentioned they had a California-based office, they did not. They failed to mention where the city and address was located, so it was hard for us to actually believe that they would be doing business in California. sorry. So the proposal from Trifecta was scored as the overall top company. The total of $577,007. Trifecta achieved this rank given its presence with offices in both Sacramento, Stockton, and Pleasanton, keen understanding of the local labor market, experience in providing similar services to other water districts. Based on the analysis.
Sorry,
I'm sorry,
another
sir.
question. Who was it that bought Blue Ribbon?
So Talmo bought Blue Ribbon out.
And so they weren't in the,
They actually did do a bid, but their bid was more in line with what, it was like $650,000, so it was a lot higher. Their markup is significantly higher than what Trifecta is.
and that would be, in the bids, that's probably the biggest factor is the markup that they do. I think the unfortunate thing for them is they are very local.
Well, actually,
They were, it used to be at least.
they used to be local, so, and because of the fact that they're doing work out of Southern California, it makes it harder for them to actually effectively staff in a timely manner the staff that we're needing.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So this structure provides the district with the opportunity to evaluate the contract performance year after year. Oh, did I miss one? I did that one. Okay, so sorry, I got interrupted. Based on the analysis of the bids on the preferred company, staff recommends a one-year contract term with options for 2 additional one-year contract term. And this structure provides the district with the opportunity to evaluate the contract performance after the first year. Our recommendation, option 1 is to award a contract to Trifecta in the amount not to exceed amount of $577,007 plus a 5% contingency for a total amount of $605,857 annually for a one-year contract with the option of 2 one-year contract extensions that the general manager could then approve.
I'm sorry, this appears that the PowerPoint was not updated, so this is not the correct option that appeared on today's agenda. So even though it's quite similar, I just want to read what the actual option is. The option is award a contract to Trifecta Incorporated in the not-to-exceed amount of $577,007 for temporary employee and payroll services with a 5% contingency for a total of $605,857 for 1 year beginning November 1st, 2024, and authorize the general manager to extend the contract for up to 2 additional one-year periods, subject to the annual contract amount increasing by no more than 5% annually in each of the years 2 and 3. So this was staff's take, and then legal added very specific language. So staff is requesting option 1 as I have read.
I'll move option 1.
Second, George, you have a question?
Blue Ribbon was a local company. Trifecta is from Stockton and Pleasanton. Are they prepared to come here to interview the potential candidates for our temporary assignments?
They did mention that in their proposal, yes.
Okay, just making sure. Okay.
Any other board questions, comments? Is there any public question or comment?
If members of the public would like to address the board on action item number 9, please refer to the instructions on page 2 of today's agenda. President Day does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on action item number 1, action 9, option 1, moved by Director Veerkamp and seconded by Director Anzini. I believe we're ready for the vote.
All right, please vote. Thank you very much.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye. Motion carries.
Move to item 10. Yeah, we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll be back at 11 or 12:10. Ooh. On your mark. Are we live? All right, thank you. We're back in session, and we're ready for action item number 10.
President Day, not that I don't want to hear Tracy talk, but I'm going to move option 1 on item 10.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any board questions? Any public comment on item number 10?
Nice job, Tracy.
If members of the public would like to address the board on action item number 10, please refer to the instructions in today's agenda. President Day, it does not appear there are any members of the public wishing to speak on action item number 10. Option moved by Director Veerkamp and seconded by Director Anzini. I believe we're ready for the vote.
All right, please vote.
Division 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries unanimously.
All right, now we'll move to our last item, item 11. I think this will take a little longer.
Yes. No.
Yeah. So I'm Tracy Eden Bishop, senior engineer with the district, and the purpose of this agenda item is to consider award of a design services contract for the El Dorado Hills Water Treatment Plant. So previous board actions include, in 2019, the board awarding a contract to Carollo Engineers for a first phase of a conditions assessment. And then in 2021, the second phase of the conditions assessment. And in August, are we forward there, Jen? 3, yeah. So in August of 23, review of water treatment plant conditions assessment and preliminary improvement recommendations. And November 23, the board approved a contract amendment for Carollo to prepare an implementation evaluation. November of 23, the board adopted the CIP that included this project. And just 2 months ago, the board received a review of the draft water and recycled water master plan and went on a site visit to the El Dorado Hills treatment plant. And then June 24th, 2024, the board adopted the 2024 water and recycled water master plan. So just to summarize the issue, about a year ago, staff briefed the board on the outcome of the water treatment plant asset management planning effort. At that time, due to fiscal constraints, it became apparent that the timing of the recommended improvements needed to be modified to fit within those constraints. So Carollo performed an implementation evaluation that modified the phasing and timing of the El Dorado Hills plant and Reservoir 1 water treatment plants to accommodate an extended implementation schedule that meets the long-term district funding strategies. As a result of that implementation evaluation, the El Dorado Hills has now become the highest priority project. And for reasons I'll talk about in a minute, Reservoir 1 was the highest priority, but after this implementation evaluation, the priority was changed to El Dorado Hills because of asset conditions, capacity limitations, and growth in the El Dorado Hills area. So a design contract is the next step in implementing this project. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a reminder on how we got here. We've been working on an asset management plan for the last 5 years. And we started with a conditions assessment and process evaluations at each of the plants. Then a remaining useful life analysis that provided information on when those assets should be replaced was done. And this chart is just kind of the culmination of that analysis, and it shows that the percent of life consumed at the treatment plants is over 50% in all cases. So our facilities are definitely aging. Then these assets were prioritized for replacement based on the probability of failure and the consequence of failure. So the probability was based on the age of the asset and condition of the asset, and the consequence of failure metric was measured the consequences of a plant outage, for instance, and how many customers would be impacted, and whether there was a water quality impact. So as you can see, Reservoir 1 has the highest percent of very high risk assets, and I'll talk again a little bit more about that in a minute. So you would think initially, oh yeah, that's where we need to be putting our time and effort. Our next step was to prepare master plans to determine the long-term needs at the plants where we knew we had fundamental changes in treatment that were going to be made, because we didn't want to be replacing assets now if they were just going to be replaced later through a larger master plan type project. So based on all of that analysis, this is the preliminary CIP from the draft asset management plan that the board was briefed on about a year ago. And the master plan projects for Reservoir 1 and El Dorado Hills, so that's the gold and the blue bars, you can see that we had very high expenditures in the near term. And we decided that we needed to go back and look at spacing that out a little bit, and based on the district's financial constraints. So that's when Carollo endeavored on this implementation evaluation. So the implementation evaluation assumed that we had $95 million available in the 24-28 CIP. And it also reconciled the water treatment plant and district-wide master plans. So there we had two master plans going on at the same time, one for the treatment plants and one for the greater or the wider, broader potable water system. And that resulted in shifting the priority from Reservoir 1 to El Dorado Hills due to higher growth and the need for more capacity in El Dorado Hills until gravity mains can be built from the east into the west areas of the district. This also resulted in adding an increment of new capacity in the Phase 1 project, 1.5 million gallons per day for El Dorado Hills of the 4.5 million gallon per day expansion, and 3 of that going up into the Serrano and Bass Lake areas. And as you may recall, that will also take a new Oak Ridge pump station to pump that added capacity back up the hill. Yes, so this chart shows 10 years of plant demand data, and it includes maximum day demand, the top line there, 3-day average maximum, and an average annual demand. And as you can see, we're nearing capacity of the existing plant. So the current capacity is 19.5 MGD. What we're going to be expanding to is 24 MGD, and that's the top line, the top horizontal line. And then the lines, the trend lines below show that when you look at a maximum, a 3-day average maximum day, that will hit capacity around 2030. And that's the maximum day, 3-day average maximum day accounts for fluctuations in the system where we have storage, where water could be coming out of storage that day or going into storage. So that's why we use that trend. So this is great information, shows a projection of actual demand data. This is not county growth rates that are being used for master plan, for the county's master planning right now. But it's just a projection of current trends. So Patrick is going to talk a little bit about what actually happened this summer, because we're closer to capacity than this shows even. So Patrick, you want to come up?
Called heat.
Next slide. Patrick Wilson, Drinking Water Operations Manager. So the board may remember this presentation from early June when we were out at the Dorado Hills Water Treatment Plant, where we effectively indicated where the max day scenario could potentially come and subsequently continue to build, and it did this last summer. So the lines that you see on here, just for reference, the red lines at the very top are indicating 95+ degree days in consecutive order. The orange line is what the actual plant capacity is, which Tracy just mentioned was historically has been 19.5. As the board may recall, back in 2022, we installed new flow meters, both inlet and the 2 effluent flow meters at the treatment plant, and subsequently found that the treatment facility was actually producing closer to 18.5 on its maximum capacity. It's much more of a paper design from the 19.5. So some significant limitations to that. We found that as we're encroaching on 6 gallons per minute per square foot across the surface area of the filter, that we're starting to see terminal head loss. Effectively, the water's building up on the filter and not getting through the filter as we increase flow past that 18.5 number. Ultimately, that causes the filter to go offline in the event that that does occur, subsequently requiring a backwash and physical on-site acceptance from the operator. As you can see, we have a gray line on there as well. That's kind of the sustained plant capacity. That's around 18 MGD, and that is including our backwashing and flushing. So as the plant is producing water, we have to take a filter offline. We can't evenly distribute that water at 18.5 reasonably across all those filters to run for a prolonged period of time to generate close to that 19.5 number. So what we did find this year, as you see that little blue dip that goes above that gray into that orange realm, is during that time period, ultimately what we were utilizing was discharging to wastewater. So as our backwash return water comes through the plate settlers that are at that treatment, El Dorado Hills Water Treatment Plant, it's limited to about 1.5 MGD, 1.2 MGD actually. That ultimately, that excess water that we were using to flush during that time to meet the production needs in the El Dorado Hills service area required us to directly discharge that to sewer. So we were pushing the plant at its capacity while also minimizing the amount of backwash return water we were able to return to the headworks of the plant and utilize for production. In short, we effectively saw a capacity moment at the facility this summer in July, and we're there.
I guess there's another way to mitigate the peak demands would be by increasing storage so that we could handle those peak demands within the plant capacity. What's the potential for doing that?
Unfortunately, I think the size of that is going to be pretty vast. So if you consider Oak Ridge, the 2 tanks that are adjacent to Oak Ridge High School, aforementioned, those 2 tanks are the primary driver in the El Dorado Hills area. Almost all the water goes through those 2 tanks that serves in that capacity. Expanding that property would require us to get additional footprint there as we maximized all the available parcel that we have. It would be a substantial amount of storage in order to offset what we're seeing in terms of the diurnal swings in the system. Potentially, it's there. I think we're still going to ultimately struggle with the ability to produce water and put it into the system. Even if we had additional storage, I think we might not be able to succumb to being able to getting out of that diurnal and getting able to a refill mode. We'd still probably struggle through that. I think there's potentially an avenue there, but it's highly unlikely it would benefit us in the short term.
Would it be?
Tanks a lot.
Tanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Would it be reasonable during the design phase to look into that? The enthusiasm.
Yeah, we could certainly look at that, but as I get into schedule, you'll see that this is like a 5-year process, so we're going to be even further out in time up against higher potential demand. But we can definitely have that discussion. We have our consultant in the room, Hazen and Sawyer, that we can talk with them about that.
The other item, when you have that much storage and it sits for a long time, is the disinfection byproduct rule. That could be an issue that would be up there, and residual chlorine contact time. I think a quick look would be good, but I'm not sure we'll be able to meet that.
Okay, so even though Reservoir 1, as you recall, had the highest percentage of at-risk assets, because of this right here, the last couple of slides, that's why we've switched our priority to El Dorado Hills. So the implementation evaluation also categorized the recommended improvements. Priority 1 project components are essential to reaching 24 MGD, and that's at a cost of about $1.4 million. Priority 2 projects are recommended but not critical for 24 MGD, but they do come with some operational challenges, so those are about $18 million. So by deferring $18 million in expenditures, we may be creating some issues for our operators. So we are going to look at those further in the basis of design report to try to ferret out exactly what that means. It may mean that some of the priority 2 projects have to move back up to a priority 1, but we may find other savings during design. So we'll be working through that. So this is just a schematic of the priority 1 project elements. And so starting in the lower right-hand corner, we'll be converting the head tank, the treatment plant head tank, to a backwash, or excuse me, a backwash tank, excuse me, head wash to a backwash tank. We have new pre-treatment flocculation and sedimentation planned, and that's right in the middle of the picture there. We need to move the generator and electrical service to make room for some other facilities that need to go in. And this is going to be a tricky project because we have to stay online during construction. So there'll be a lot of effort put into construction sequencing and how we actually do this. So you guys have your work cut out for you. The plate settlers will be relocated, and we have a new wash water basin, phase 1 of that. That's one of the projects that may move back into a priority 1. The second wash water tank on the left side of the picture. And a clear well expansion and a new an expanded high lift pump station. And that moves the water back to Oak Ridge that then can move that water back up into Serrano and the Bass Lake area. So with the first phase of the project nailed down, we're ready to start design. So the RFP design scope of work includes a basis of design report, and that will confirm plant operational and performance goals. It'll address interim operational challenges, confirm and develop design criteria, develop an access and construction phasing plan, and that will all roll up into that basis of design report and then we'll move into final design. Regulatory and environmental permit support for CEQA and a new drinking water permit for the plant and bidding support are all part of the scope of work. So a request for qualifications was issued in April of 2024. 3 firms attended the pre-qualification conference and 2 firms submitted statements of qualifications. And after the SOQs were reviewed and we had in-person interviews, both firms were determined to be qualified. So we requested cost proposals and did receive proposals from the 2 firms. So these are the fee proposals, the base fee proposals. So Carollo proposed $7.4 million. Hazen and Sawyer, $5.6 million. And just for reference, the industry standard for design is less than 10%, depending on the project. We have about $80 million in construction cost. So Carollo is 9.2% of construction, and Hazen and Sawyer is 7%. So they're both right in where you would expect them to be with a design fee. So that cost difference is $1.8 million. So with such a large cost difference, you get a little nervous about that, what's going on. So the selection committee did an in-depth analysis of staff expertise, hours, and references. And what we found was that a majority of the cost difference is from hourly rates, and that chart shows the respective hourly rates between Carollo and Hazen. And you can see that Hazen in the red there, their rates are substantially lower for the same level of staffing. Same expertise level. So another contributing factor to the cost difference is a difference in the staffing expertise that was being proposed. Carollo, their business model is just a little different than Hazen and Sawyer's. They use more senior staff to do more of the work, and Hazen is proposing to use more assistant engineer level engineers to do more of the work under senior supervision. So we did ask for some additional information just to make sure that everyone was comfortable with that. And so we requested assistant engineer level staff qualifications and Hazen's quality control practices, and they were both found to be acceptable. So based on qualifications and the cost proposal, the selection committee believes that Hazen and Sawyer's proposal represents the best overall value to the district, and not just based on cost, but I spent quite a bit of time on reference checks, and they have good references. They're a well-respected firm. They're a large firm with a design of over 200 water treatment plants across the United States. They have experienced and highly qualified senior staff. So in addition to the base services, staff is recommending inclusion of an early electrical gear bid package, because of long lead times for electrical equipment right now. So based on the base services fee and the optional services for the electrical gear, staff is recommending award to Hazen and Sawyer in the amount of about $5.7 million. Schedule. There you go. Okay, so the anticipated schedule for the project is provided in this table. We expect that the basis of design report will be done in the spring of '25. Environmental review will start right away, and we will be doing that through winter of '25-26. Final design should be done by fall of '26. The electrical gear purchase will kind of be ongoing throughout the whole process, just to get that equipment here early on after we've gotten a contractor on board. And construction would begin in January of '27 through mid-2030. The 24 through 28 CIP included $90 million for El Dorado Hills and Reservoir 1 combined. So if you go back to that chart with all those expenditures early on, we had some governors put on us by Jim and others, like we only can afford this much, and that's that $90 million. That would be funded through planned 2024 and 2027 bond funding, and this will be updated with this next CIP because we are switching priority between Reservoir 1 and El Dorado Hills.
And I'd like to add, if the board does approve this, we're going to be relying on the 2024 bond funding. That decision's coming before you in October, I believe would be a good time for the bonds. And this is the second project. We have the intertie project associated with the 24 bonds and this project. So we really, if the board approves this, we'll need to proceed with the 2024 bonds.
So the anticipated funding need to get through the design phase includes about $5.7 for Hazen and Sawyer's design contract, $250,000 for capitalized labor, $600,000 in project contingencies, and for a total funding request of $6.6 million. So board options, option 1, award a contract to Hasten and Sawyer in the not-to-exceed amount of $5,739,265 for design of the El Dorado Hills improvements, and authorize additional funding of $250,000 for capitalized labor, $600,000 in contingencies for a total funding request of $6,589,265 for the El Dorado Hills Water Treatment Plant Improvements Project, Project 24011.01. Any questions? Oh, excuse me. Board, yeah, we recommend option 1.
All right, thank you. Any board questions? You can build the whole thing for the 5.7 million, right? That was my take. So, well, it can't hurt to ask. Do I have a motion?
I think the representative from El Dorado Hills ought to make the motion.
This is a hard one, man. A lot of money.
I'll make the recommendations this time, also covering your older residents.
That's true, we got 3 people representing.
Are you
All right,
moving option 1?
Yes.
I'll second it. Is there any public comment on item 11?
If members of the public would like to address the board on action item 11, option 1, moved by Director Anzini and seconded by Director Day, please refer to the instructions in today's agenda. President Day, it does not appear any members of the public are wishing to address the board on action item number 11. I believe we're ready for the vote.
All right, please vote. And I had a request from a constituent to make sure you keep the cell tower facility.
Division
just saying.
1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, voting aye, motion carries unanimously.
All right, thank you. We will now retire to closed session. Counselors, do we have a time estimate?
Yeah. Thank you, President Day. The board will be meeting in closed session to discuss the matter which is agendized today as closed session item A, and it will reconvene its discussion of closed session B, after which I will return to the board and report on any action items. I anticipate the board's consideration of these 2 items will require at least 30 minutes, but could be longer.
Yeah. So we'll retire to closed session, and we will return no sooner than 5 minutes after 1, but it could be later than that.
President Day?
Yes.
Since the consultant's been here patiently through this whole meeting, would you like to offer them an opportunity to say anything to the board?
Sure.
Giving us a discount, right?
Good afternoon, President and board members, staff. On behalf of Hazen Sawyer, my name is Ben Romero. I'm the operations manager here in the Sacramento office. We just would like to thank you for this opportunity. We're very humbled. With me, come up here. Is the team that will be leading this, and I will give them an opportunity to say a little.
Thank you so much. My name is Nicole Blute, and I'll be the project manager for this project. And we really appreciate the opportunity. We're very excited to work with you on this kind of landmark project for the district. And we'll try to keep that cell tower. So thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Ifan. I will be assisting Nicole in managing this project. Just want to say thank you for this incredible opportunity. We're all a bunch of water nerds, and we're incredibly excited to design this treatment plant for El Dorado Hills. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Looking forward to working with you guys. Thank you. And so now we'll return no sooner than 1:10, but it could be later.
And for the purposes of this meeting, we will shut down the Zoom meeting. and once the board returns, I will reopen.
From closed session, Counselor, anything to report?
President Day, the board met in closed session on 2 matters. Under closed session item A, it received a briefing from its information technology director but took no reportable action. And on closed session B, it consulted with counsel and there also took no reportable action, and that concludes my report.
All right, thank you. Any assignments?
None today.
All right, meeting adjourned at 1:27.
Thank you.